Hello there, and welcome to Planet in Question. This is the quiet little corner where questions wander slowly and curiosity has all the time it needs to stretch out and get comfortable. Tonight, we're not rushing anywhere. We're not here for a quick fact or a fast answer. Instead, we're going to settle into a question so large, so strange, that it feels more like a dream than a straightforward idea. It's the thought that maybe, just maybe, we aren't the very first intelligent species to live on this planet. Not the first to wander at the stars, not the first to shape the Earth in ways that went beyond instinct, but simply one chapter among many in a much longer story. Before we let that idea unfold, I'd like to invite you to notice where you are right now. Maybe you're curled up under a blanket, the lights dim, the world around you quiet. Maybe you're listening on a morning walk, the sky stretching above you while your feet find their rhythm. Or maybe you've stumbled onto this in the middle of a busy day, needing a little pause, a gentle detour that doesn't demand too much. Wherever you are, you've brought yourself here to this moment, and that in itself feels meaningful. We'll use this space not to race through information but to wander, slowly, through a landscape of imagination and memory, one that stretches back into the deepest parts of Earth's history. When we think of our place on this planet, it's tempting to see ourselves as the final act, the grand arrival, the inevitable peak of evolution. After all, we've built cities, written books, sent machines into space, and even split atoms. No other creature we know of has done anything quite like that. But if you pull the lens back far enough billions of years back, the confidence in that thought begins to waver. The Earth is ancient in a way that's almost impossible to hold in the mind. 4.5 billion years. 4,500 million years. Numbers so large they dissolve into abstraction the moment you try to grasp them. One way people try to make sense of it is to compress the whole of Earth's history into a single day. In that day, the Earth forms at midnight, a ball of molten rock beneath a sky still filled with debris. By 4 in the morning, simple life has appeared, tiny microbes drifting in the oceans. Multicellular life doesn't show up until the evening, almost an afterthought. Dinosaurs don't stride across the continents until late at night. And then, in the final seconds before midnight strikes again, humans appear. All of history, every empire, every invention, every poem fits into a single blink almost too brief to notice. If our story is such a blink, then the long hours that came before stretch out vast and dark. In those hours, the Earth wasn't empty. It was alive with creatures we'll never see except through fossils. Forests rose and fell. Continents collided and drifted apart. Oceans covered whole land masses and then retreated again. Time wasn't still. It was busy with experiment after experiment, trial after trial of life finding its way into forms both familiar and alien. And here's where the question begins to glow. What if, in all those vast hours, some other species reached a kind of intelligence before us? What if another kind of mind once shaped the world, thought in stories, perhaps even built things, only to vanish long before we came along? It sounds like something out of myth or science fiction. Atlantis beneath the waves, forgotten empires swallowed by jungles. But the idea is not necessarily so far from the realm of possibility. Earth is a forgetful host. It recycles itself constantly, wearing away mountains, swallowing oceans, grinding stone back into magma, and spitting it out again as new land. Even the ruins of human civilization, our bridges, our skyscrapers, our satellites will vanish in a geological instant if left untended. Within decades, buildings crumble. Within centuries, nature swallows cities. Within millions of years, almost everything is erased, buried, or transformed beyond recognition. If that is the fate of our own works, how much harder would it be to find the faint traces of a civilization that might have existed not thousands of years ago, but millions, or even tens of millions? And yet, when you sit with that thought, the silence of the fossil record takes on a different tone. Maybe it isn't just empty. Maybe it's a silence we haven't learned how to listen to yet. Scientists have a name for a version of this question: the Silurian Hypothesis. It asks whether it would even be possible to detect an industrial civilization if it had existed millions of years before humans. Not through intact ruins or recognizable artifacts, but through subtler signs, changes in the chemistry of rocks, unusual isotopes, patterns in sediments. The Earth does remember things, just not always in the way we expect. Our own activities have already left fingerprints in ice cores and soil samples, traces that might linger for millions of years even after our cities are dust. If another intelligence once shaped the planet, their legacy might not look like a broken temple or a rusted tool. It might look like a faint line of metals, a thin layer of altered atmosphere, a puzzle piece we've been mistaking for something natural all along. And so tonight, instead of racing toward answers, we'll let ourselves drift with the question, not to prove or disprove, but to imagine, to lean into the possibility that humanity may not be the first to wonder at the stars or dream of the future. We'll walk gently through Earth's deep past, through oceans that no longer exist, through forests older than memory, through worlds reshaped by fire and ice. Along the way, we'll ask what kinds of beings could have flourished, how their intelligence might have looked, and why so little would remain. The point isn't to find certainty. The point is to feel the scale of time, to see ourselves in perspective, and to remember that our moment, bright and brief though it may be, is part of a much larger flow. So as you settle in, let this question sit beside you like a companion. What if humanity isn't the first intelligent species on Earth? What if we are just the latest dream this planet has had, and not its only one? The vast timeline of Earth. If you close your eyes for a moment and imagine the history of Earth as a great scroll unrolling across the floor, it would stretch so far that your mind would lose sight of the beginning long before you reach the end. This planet beneath our feet is not a young world. It is old in a way that almost escapes language. 4.5 billion years, an amount of time so immense that even when we say the number out loud, it feels hollow, abstract, almost meaningless. Our minds can picture 1,000 years, perhaps 1,000,000 if we stretch, but billions begin to blur into something so distant that it might as well be forever. And yet that forever is exactly what we stand upon every day, the deep, unseen foundation of our lives. One way to bring it closer is to imagine Earth's history compressed into a single day. Midnight strikes, and the Earth is born, a fiery ball of molten rock, bombarded by asteroids, its surface cracked and shifting beneath a violent young sky. By 4 a.m, the very first flicker of life stirs tiny microbes, simple and fragile, drifting in ancient seas. For most of this long day, that is all the Earth knows. Microscopic life clinging to survival while the planet itself changes shape again and again. Hours pass in silence. Continents rise and fall, oceans widen and shrink, and life goes about its business at a pace that seems glacial, almost still. It is not until the evening that the story begins to change. Around 6 or 7 o'clock, multicellular organisms appear, fragile creatures in the sea, their bodies soft and strange, unlike anything alive today. By 9 o'clock, the first forests spread across the land, green canopies sheltering insects as large as birds. By 10, dinosaurs stride across the continents, their shadows stretching over a world that seems to belong entirely to them. And then, in the final hour, the last few minutes before midnight, something remarkable happens. Humans arrive. Not in the morning or even the afternoon, but in the last sliver of time, a blink in which every empire, every city, every invention takes place. If you were watching the scroll of time unfold across that single day, you might almost miss us, so quick and so recent is our appearance. And this is what makes the question so haunting. If our story fits into the final seconds of a cosmic day, then what else might have taken place in all those long hours before? What other experiments in life might have unfolded, risen, and vanished, leaving little more than whispers in stone? We know of trilobites, ammonites, ichthyosaurs, and mammoths because fossils have been kind enough to preserve them. But fossils are not generous keepers. They are rare, fragile, scattered. Most living things leave no trace behind. Most histories are swallowed back into the planet, recycled into dust and stone. It's like watching a theatre where the stage is wiped clean after every performance, leaving the next act to play upon an empty floor. Our own civilization, young as it is, can already see how easily memory fades. Buildings crumble after only a few decades if no one maintains them. Roads split and vanish under weeds. Entire cities, abandoned for a few centuries, can dissolve back into forests so thoroughly that you'd never guess they were there. Extend that out further. 100,000 years, 1,000,000, 10 million. The steel rusts, the glass shatters, the concrete erodes, and the ground reclaims everything. The scroll keeps unrolling, and the ink we left upon it fades almost instantly. That's just human history. Imagine if there had been another species before us, building, planning, thinking, shaping. What chance would their memory have against the immense patience of time? To sit with that thought is to feel a kind of humility. We tend to think of intelligence as the final prize, the ultimate trick that evolution pulled from its sleeve. But perhaps intelligence is not a peak. Perhaps it is a wave, something that rises again and again in different forms. Dolphins, crows, elephants, octopuses all show sparks of the kind of thought we recognize as kin to our own. They solve problems, they grieve, they remember, they even play. If such sparks can appear now in species that are not us, might they not have flared brighter long before we ever walked upright? And if so, what became of them? Earth's deep timeline is filled with resets. Mass extinctions have swept across the planet like great erasers, clearing the slate again and again. The Permian extinction wiped out most of the life on Earth, leaving only fragments to repopulate. The asteroid at the end of the Cretaceous ended the reign of the dinosaurs, opening the way for mammals to flourish. Each time the story restarted, but not from nothing. Life adapted, evolved, and tried new forms. Each extinction was both an ending and a beginning, a hand turning the page so the next chapter could be written. If that is the rhythm of Earth, then who is to say intelligence itself has not been written before, only to be erased, leaving us as the latest attempt, not the first? It is easy to picture Earth before us as empty wilderness, as though the world was waiting, patient and still, for humans to arrive. But the truth is far more complex. This planet has never been empty. It has always been full, teeming with creatures, forests, coral reefs, deserts, ice, volcanoes, and storms. It has been alive with experiments we can only glimpse through scattered bones and mineralized shells. The stage was never bare, only filled with actors we no longer recognize. And among them, perhaps, were ones who thought, who planned, who dreamed in ways we might call civilization if only we had seen them with our own eyes. When you step outside under the night sky and think about time in this way, it is both humbling and strangely comforting. We are not the sole owners of thought or memory. We are not the climax of the story. We are simply part of a much longer rhythm, one that began long before us and will continue long after. And that perspective, rather than making us small, might actually make our time here more precious. Because if intelligence rises again and again, then our moment is one shining instance in a constellation of possibilities. We are not the only flame, but one among many, flickering for our span before time folds us back into its silence. And so, as we wander deeper into this thought, let us remember where we are on the scroll of time. Not at the beginning, not even close to the middle, but right at the edge, in the briefest blink of the cosmic day. Everything we know, everything we build, everything we call civilization sits here, in this final sliver. What came before is a mystery so vast that it almost dares us to look closer. And what comes next is a mystery just as deep. Tonight, we'll walk that line together, curious, unhurried, and willing to imagine that the past holds secrets stranger than we've ever allowed ourselves to believe. 2. Intelligence beyond humans. If you sit quietly for a while and think about what makes humans so different from all the other creatures around us, the first word that usually rises to the surface is intelligence. We write poetry and build spacecraft. We chart the stars and send signals into the dark. We ask questions about the universe and about ourselves. It feels like a defining feature, the quality that sets us apart from everything else. But when you soften that thought and look more carefully at the living world, you start to notice something surprising. Intelligence doesn't belong only to us. It appears again and again, scattered across the branches of life in ways that remind us that thinking is not a single summit with humanity perched on top, but a field filled with many paths and many kinds of minds. Take the raven, for example. Dark feathers, sharp eyes, a bird that most people think of as ordinary or even ominous. And yet, these birds can solve puzzles, remember faces, even plan for the future. They have been seen using sticks to pry food from cracks, dropping nuts on roads so cars will break them open, and playing games in the air. When scientists place food inside a tube with water, ravens have been observed dropping pebbles inside until the water level rises enough for them to reach the treat. That is not instinct alone, it is problem solving, a spark of reasoning that echoes our own. Or think of dolphins. Their intelligence shines in a different way. They recognize themselves in mirrors, a rare trait that suggests self-awareness. They communicate with clicks and whistles that seem to form a language of sorts, even giving themselves signature sounds like names. They play, they teach, they pass knowledge from one generation to another. Watching them leap and dive through the waves, it is not hard to imagine that they hold thoughts and feelings deeper than we can ever fully know. Then there are octopuses, those strange, alien-looking creatures with 8 arms and shifting colours. They can unscrew jars to reach food, escape from tanks by remembering the layout of a room, and even use discarded coconut shells as portable shelters. Each arm contains its own network of nerves, almost like a brain of its own, giving them a kind of distributed intelligence we can barely imagine. When you see an octopus change colour to blend into coral or squeeze through a crack that seems impossibly small, you realise you are looking at a mind very different from ours, but a mind nonetheless. And these are only a few examples. Elephants mourn their dead, touching bones gently as though remembering. Parrots can learn human words and use them in context. Even ants and bees, creatures so small that we barely notice them, create intricate societies where roles are divided, knowledge is shared, and survival depends on cooperation. Intelligence does not bloom in one place and stop. It flickers across the tree of life like sparks scattered in the dark. Now imagine pulling back the lens of time once more. If so many creatures alive today carry these sparks of thought, how many others might have carried them in the deep past? Dinosaurs ruled the planet for more than 160 million years, far longer than humans have existed. Among them was a species called Troodon, with large eyes, grasping hands, and a brain size relative to its body that rivaled modern birds. Some scientists have speculated, carefully and quietly, that had dinosaurs not gone extinct, Troodon or a species like it might have continued to evolve, perhaps developing greater intelligence, perhaps even creating something we might recognize as civilization. It may sound like imagination running away with itself, but the point is not to claim certainty. The point is to recognize possibility. Intelligence is not a single straight line with us at the end. It is a branching tree with many potential outcomes. Perhaps in another age, another branch reached far further than we suspect. Perhaps it bloomed, flourished, and then was swept away by the tides of extinction, leaving only fossils too subtle for us to connect with that deeper story. Even today, when we think of intelligence, we tend to picture it in our own shape. We expect tools made of stone or metal, straight lines carved into the earth, marks that look like writing, sounds that resemble language. But what if intelligence can take forms that leave no such traces? Dolphins and whales live in the oceans, their worlds fluid and shifting, with little need for permanent structures. Octopuses might weave intelligence into their skins, flashing colours to communicate ideas. Even ants, though simple on their own, form colonies that act like superorganisms, their collective intelligence spread across thousands of individuals. If such societies were to rise and fall millions of years ago, what evidence would remain for us to find? Perhaps almost none. When you sit with this thought, it changes the way you see the planet around you. The forests are not just silent backdrops. The oceans are not empty but full of minds moving in currents of thought we cannot translate. The sky itself is crossed by birds who may understand more than we give them credit for. Intelligence feels less like a rare jewel and more like a common thread, woven into life again and again, each time in a different pattern. And if that is true today, then how much truer might it have been in the vast forgotten chapters of Earth's past? It may be tempting to believe that we are unique, that we alone carry the torch of reason and imagination, but when you look closely, the world is filled with echoes, reminders that we are not as singular as we like to think. We may be the first species to build skyscrapers and rockets, but we may not be the first to wonder, to plan, to dream in ways we would recognize if only we could translate the signs. And that realization carries both humility and comfort. Humility, because it reminds us that our intelligence is not a final crown but one possibility among many. Comfort, because it suggests that thinking, imagining, and creating are not fragile accidents, but recurring features of life itself. So, as we move forward in this journey, keep in mind that intelligence is not just a human trait. It is scattered across the living world, woven into its creatures, shining in places we might not expect. If we are willing to imagine that intelligence has risen many times in the present, then perhaps we can imagine that it rose many times in the past as well. And if that is true, then the story of Earth is far richer, far stranger, and far more filled with possibility than we ever learned in school. 2. Intelligence beyond humans. When most of us pause to think about what makes humanity special, the answer that comes to mind first is intelligence. We are the species that tells stories, that paints and sings, that sends machines across oceans of space, that contemplates its own mortality under the stars. It feels obvious, natural, almost self-evident, that thought and imagination belong to us alone, that reason is our inheritance and no one else's. But the closer you look at the living world around us, the less certain that belief becomes. Intelligence, as it turns out, is not a peak we climb to alone. It is scattered across the branches of life, shining here and there in unexpected places, as though the universe has tried the experiment of thinking many times, not just once. Consider the raven, perched on a telephone wire or gliding over a field. To many, it is just another bird, a symbol of shadow or omen in old myths. But scientists who have studied ravens have seen them solve puzzles that would confound even young children. They can pick up sticks and shape them into tools, wedge them into cracks to reach food, and even plan several steps ahead. In cities, they've learned to drop nuts onto roads and wait for cars to crack them open, flying down quickly in the pause when traffic stops. These are not simple instincts repeated blindly from generation to generation. These are choices, decisions, demonstrations of reasoning, and of play. A raven in the snow rolling down a roof on a piece of plastic isn't just surviving, it is enjoying. That is intelligence too. Or picture a dolphin slipping through the water with effortless grace, its body cutting the waves like a silver blade. Dolphins recognize themselves in mirrors, something only a few species are known to do, suggesting self-awareness. They develop signature whistles, almost like names, and can remember the unique call of another dolphin even after 20 years apart. They coordinate hunts with complex strategies, surrounding schools of fish, trapping them with bubbles, or even using their tails to strike fish into stunned submission. And they pass these skills down, generation after generation, teaching their young. The ocean is their world, and within it, their minds move as fluidly as the currents. Then there are octopuses, creatures that feel as though they were designed by a different planet altogether. 8 arms, shifting colours, an intelligence that seems to reside not just in their central brain but in each limb, giving them a distributed awareness unlike anything we know. An octopus can open a jar to reach food, escape from an aquarium by memorizing its layout, or carry coconut shells across the seafloor to use as shelter. Their problem-solving abilities and playfulness show us another path, another kind of mind. When one of these animals stretches a curious arm through water, changing colour as it touches and explores, it is difficult to deny that some form of thought flickers behind its gaze. Even elephants, creatures of land and memory, carry intelligence in ways that resonate with our own hearts. They have been observed returning to the bones of their dead, touching them gently with their trunks, pausing as though remembering. They recognize themselves in reflections, they communicate over vast distances with low-frequency rumbles, and they care for their young with tenderness. Their societies are built on cooperation and on wisdom, with elders guiding herds to water holes remembered from years past. Their minds move slowly, but deeply, and then, in creatures far smaller, the sparks appear again. Ants and bees create complex societies where roles are divided, information is shared, and cooperation is essential. A single ant may seem simple, even mindless, but thousands together act almost like a superorganism, their intelligence distributed across the colony. Bees can dance to communicate the direction and distance of flowers, encoding information into rhythm and movement. Intelligence in this form does not look like ours. It is collective, not individual, but it shows us that the act of solving problems, of adapting, of thinking, is not unique to us. If so many creatures alive today show glimmers of intelligence, then it becomes natural to wonder how many creatures in the deep past may have carried those glimmers further than we realize. Dinosaurs dominated the Earth for more than 160 million years. Within that span, a small species called Troodon stood out. It had grasping hands, large forward-facing eyes, and a brain size relative to its body that was closer to modern birds than to other reptiles. Some paleontologists have speculated that if the asteroid had not struck, If evolution had continued along its winding paths, Troodon, or something like it, might have developed greater intelligence, perhaps even reaching levels of planning and creativity we would recognize. It is easy to dismiss this as imagination, but perhaps that is because we expect intelligence to look like our own. We look for stone tools, for fire, for carved symbols, for buildings of wood or brick. But what if intelligence in another age looked different? What if it was carried in the sea like the dolphins, leaving no ruins behind? What if it lived in shifting societies that built with organic materials long since vanished, or in ways that blended too seamlessly with the natural world for us to notice? A civilization of dolphins would not leave behind stone pyramids. A lineage of octopus-like beings might leave no ruins at all, their achievements living only in memory and movement. Even ants and bees remind us that societies need not build monuments to be complex. They carry intelligence in collective form, ephemeral, difficult to fossilize. When you think of it this way, the world begins to feel alive in a new sense. The forests whisper with hidden minds, the oceans shimmer with unseen thought, the sky itself carries intelligence on feathered wings. We are not the sole holders of thought, but one more experiment in a long, unending series of experiments that life has conducted upon this planet. If so much intelligence exists now, scattered and diverse, how much more might have existed in the forgotten stretches of time before us? And so the question takes on a softer, deeper tone. Perhaps humanity is not a lonely exception. Perhaps we are a continuation. Intelligence, imagination, creativity, these may not be fragile accidents. They may be features of life itself, appearing again and again wherever survival gives them room to grow. We might be the first to launch satellites, but we may not be the first to wonder. We may be the first to write novels, but we may not be the first to dream. As this thought rests in your mind, notice how it changes the feeling of being human. Instead of standing alone on a pinnacle, we stand within a network, part of a long lineage of minds, each different, each remarkable. Instead of being an endpoint, we are a chapter, one flame in a series of flickers that have burned on this planet before and may burn again long after us. And that perspective does not make us smaller. If anything, it makes our time here feel richer, because even if we are only one of many, our moment of intelligence is still a rare and beautiful thing, shining briefly in the vastness of Earth's story. 3. The Earth's forgetful nature. Imagine standing on a shoreline, watching the waves rise and fall in their endless rhythm. Each wave that reaches the sand erases the marks left behind by the one before it. Footprints vanish, driftwood shifts, shells are buried. The beach seems to forget with each new tide. Earth, in its own way, works very much like that. It is not a static archive where every detail is preserved for eternity. Instead, it is restless, recycling itself, erasing, reshaping, building new layers over old. It is a planet of memory, yes, but also of forgetting. And this forgetfulness lies at the heart of why we may never know the full story of what has lived and thrived here before us. When we think of history, we often imagine libraries of stone, museums of fossils, records waiting patiently to be read. But the truth is far less generous. Fossils, those precious glimpses into life long gone, are astonishingly rare. For every creature that lived, almost none left any trace. To become a fossil requires an almost impossible sequence of luck. The right conditions, the right burial, the right minerals seeping in over vast stretches of time. Even then, fossils are fragile, waiting to be uncovered by erosion or human hands before they crumble back into dust. It is said that less than a fraction of 1% of all species that ever lived are represented in the fossil record. The rest are gone, forgotten by stone, their existence erased without a whisper. And fossils are only part of the story. Earth itself is alive in a way that makes permanence elusive. The surface of the planet is made of plates that drift and collide, dragging continents across oceans, raising mountains that will later erode back into plains. Volcanoes erupt, burying landscapes in fire and ash. Glaciers grind across valleys, scouring them smooth. Rivers change course, washing away evidence of what once stood on their banks. Over millions of years, entire regions can vanish underwater, lifted up again, then swallowed once more. What seems stable in our lifetimes is anything but in the grand span of geological time. Think about our own world, the one we call modern. Cities of steel and glass stretch upward, satellites circle in the sky, machines dig deep into the earth. It all feels so permanent, as though our mark on the world will last forever. Yet if every human disappeared tomorrow, how long would it take for nature to reclaim it all? In only a few decades, concrete would crack, bridges would collapse, vines and roots would weave their way through empty buildings. In a few centuries, forests would cover the ruins. In 10,000 years, perhaps only scattered traces would remain, and in 1,000,000 years, even those traces would be difficult to recognize. Earth is not a museum. It is a gardener, constantly pruning, constantly replanting. This is the challenge of deep history. The further back we look, the more the record thins. The continents themselves have been recycled, their oldest surfaces swallowed into the mantle, melted and reformed as new crust. The ocean floors are even younger, constantly refreshed, none older than about 200 million years. That might sound ancient, but compared to the planet's 4.5 billion years, it is only the last few pages of a book whose earlier chapters have been torn away. If a civilization had existed 500 million years ago, what evidence would remain? Almost nothing. Perhaps a chemical anomaly locked in a mineral layer, perhaps a curious deposit of metals, perhaps nothing at all. This forgetfulness is not malicious. It is simply the nature of a living world, and yet it complicates our search for deep memory. We might imagine that if another intelligent species had once walked this planet, we would surely know. There would be ruins, artifacts, signs carved into stone. But the more you sit with the reality of Earth's constant renewal, the less certain that assumption feels. Ruins dissolve, stone weathers, artifacts break, metals corrode, oceans rise, mountains crumble. 1,000,000 years is enough to erase almost everything. 100 million years erases even more. Time does not need to conspire, it only needs to pass. Scientists sometimes joke that Earth suffers from amnesia, but it may be more accurate to say that Earth is a storyteller who writes and rewrites the same scroll, layering new words over old ones, never pausing long enough to let any story sit forever. Each extinction is a page turned, each eruption is an erasure, each shifting continent is a new chapter written over the traces of the last. For us, trying to read this palimpsest of stone and soil is like trying to decipher a manuscript that has been written over again and again, its earlier text faded almost beyond recognition. And so we find ourselves in a peculiar position. We live on a world that has hosted life for billions of years, and yet our knowledge of that life is patchy, incomplete, filled with gaps as wide as oceans. We piece together what we can, a fossil bone here, a mineral trace there, a hint in the chemistry of ancient rocks, but we know that most of the story has been lost. If intelligence bloomed in some forgotten era, it may be among the things erased, covered over by the waves of time. The silence in the rocks is not proof that nothing happened. It is proof only that the Earth is very good at keeping its secrets. There is a strange comfort in this too. The idea that Earth forgets means that nothing is entirely permanent, not even us. The skyscrapers, the satellites, the monuments we raise, they will all one day be folded back into the ground. What lasts is not the detail, but the rhythm, the rise, the fall, the renewal. Life returns again and again, even after catastrophe. The Earth may not remember every actor, but it remembers the play, and it performs it endlessly. So, when we ask whether humanity is the first intelligent species on this planet, we are not asking a simple question with a simple answer. We are asking something that brushes against the very nature of memory and time. The Earth is a stage that resets itself with every act. It is entirely possible that others have performed here before us, only to have their lines erased, their sets dismantled, their presence forgotten. And if that is true, then we are not just alone in our intelligence, but part of a lineage of forgotten minds, each one rising, shining for a moment, and then fading back into silence. That thought might feel unsettling, but it can also feel strangely freeing. Our time is brief, yes, but it is also part of something vast and ongoing. We may not be the first, and we will not be the last. The Earth will forget us, as it has forgotten so much before, but the rhythm of life will continue. And perhaps, millions of years from now, another species will wonder about us in the same way we wonder now, imagining our presence, speculating about our story, piecing together faint traces from a planet that has already moved on. 4. The Silurian Hypothesis. There is a thought experiment in science that sounds at first like it belongs to a late-night science fiction story, but it was proposed in earnest by two scientists not too long ago. It is called the Silurian Hypothesis, named with a wink toward a television series where ancient reptilian beings once ruled the Earth in secret. The idea is not that such a story is literally true, but rather to ask a gentler, deeper question. If an intelligent civilization had risen on Earth millions of years before humans, would we even know it today? The answer, unsettling in its humility, may be no. The Silurian Hypothesis begins with the recognition that Earth is a forgetful place, always recycling its surface, always erasing and rewriting its story. If a human city, with its concrete towers and steel bridges, were abandoned today, it would begin dissolving within decades. A few hundred years later, plants and soil would cover the ruins. A few thousand years after that, weather and rivers would have washed most traces away. Stretch the timeline out to 1,000,000 years, and the odds of finding clear evidence shrink almost to nothing. Concrete turns to dust, metals corrode, glass fractures, plastics crumble. Even the most enduring monuments would wear away, and beyond that 1,000,000 years, the shifting of tectonic plates and the churn of the mantle would bury, break, and transform everything left behind. So the hypothesis asks, if we are so easily erased, what hope would there be of discovering a civilization that rose and fell 50 million years ago, or 100 million, or 200? Archaeology, as we practice it today, looks back thousands of years. The oldest known human-built structures are perhaps 12,000 years old. That is a blink compared to Earth's age. If we tried to look 50 million years back, we would not be finding temples or sculptures. We would be looking at layers of rock that formed when that supposed civilization was still alive, and those rocks have been compressed, twisted, melted, and shifted ever since. The older the layer, the less it remembers. The Silurian Hypothesis suggests that the most likely clues of an ancient industrial civilization would not be monuments or artifacts, but subtle geochemical signals. Our own civilization has already begun leaving such markers. In the thin crust of soil and ice that records the present age, there will be traces of plastics, synthetic chemicals, heavy metals, and radioactive isotopes from nuclear testing. Even if every building and every machine were erased, these fingerprints might linger in the rocks for millions of years. A future geologist, perhaps not even human, might one day stumble across them and wonder about the strange moment in Earth's history when the planet's chemistry shifted suddenly, unnaturally, as though something had intervened. If we can imagine our own legacy being detected this way, then we must ask whether we might already have overlooked similar signs from long ago. A streak of unusual metals in a cliff face. A layer of carbon isotopes that doesn't fit the natural rhythm. A sudden warming or cooling in the climate record that could, in theory, have been driven not only by nature but by industry. So far, we have treated these anomalies as natural events, the results of volcanism, asteroid impacts, or the slow dance of carbon through ocean and sky, and they may indeed be nothing more. But the Silurian Hypothesis reminds us of our bias. We do not look for ancient civilizations because we do not expect to find them. When the possibility is so far outside our imagination, the evidence, even if it existed, would likely be interpreted another way. This does not mean that Earth hides secret histories with certainty. It simply means that the absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence, not in a world as restless as ours. It means that our confidence in being the first may be less certain than we assume, and perhaps more importantly, it means that our own presence will one day be as fragile as any that may have come before us. Think of the comfort and humility in that. We like to believe that we are permanent, that our skyscrapers and satellites will echo through eternity. But the Silurian Hypothesis asks us to step outside that illusion, to recognize that we too will fade, that the Earth will continue to turn, patient and slow, long after our traces have been worn away. And if that is true, then it may have already happened before. Another intelligence may have come and gone, leaving only faint traces in stone, traces we have not yet learned to read. This perspective invites us into a different way of thinking about history. Instead of a straight line marching toward us, history becomes a tapestry, full of threads that appear, intertwine, and vanish. Some threads may have been woven long before humans arrived, carrying colours and patterns we cannot see anymore. And if those threads existed, then intelligence itself is not an exception but a rhythm. one that rises again and again when conditions allow. We are simply part of that rhythm, not its climax. The Silurian Hypothesis does not tell us what happened. It does not claim there was a great forgotten civilization. It simply asks us to be humble about what we cannot know, to remember that Earth is old, that time is vast, and that memory is fragile. It asks us to imagine the possibility that our story is not the first story of thought, and perhaps not the last. As you let this thought rest in your mind, notice how it changes the feeling of being alive here and now. Instead of standing at the pinnacle of a unique journey, we become travelers on a road well worn, walking a path that may have been walked before. That does not make our journey less meaningful. If anything, it makes it richer, because we walk not in isolation but in the company of possibilities. Possibilities we may never see clearly, but which remind us that life on Earth is stranger, older, and deeper than we can easily grasp. 5. Prehistoric earthly candidates. When we look back at the ancient ages of the Earth, it is tempting to see them as strange but simple preludes, eras filled with beasts and plants and oceans that merely waited for us to arrive. But if we allow ourselves to slow down, to linger with imagination, the past begins to shimmer with possibility. Perhaps it was not a waiting room for humanity, but a theatre where other minds once stepped onto the stage. If intelligence has arisen many times, then who are the likely candidates among the creatures of prehistory? Which branches of the evolutionary tree may have stretched toward thought, and perhaps even touched the beginnings of civilization long before we opened our first fires or carved our first stones? The most obvious candidates are the dinosaurs, the rulers of Earth for more than 160 million years. Their reign was not a brief flicker, but an era longer than the entire history of mammals that followed. During that span, countless species evolved, flourished, and vanished. Among them, one stands out in particular: Troodon. It was not the largest or the fiercest. It was small, slender, bird-like, with grasping hands and forward-facing eyes. But what made it remarkable was the size of its brain relative to its body. In that measure, it rivaled modern birds and even surpassed many mammals of its time. Its eyes suggest good vision, its hands suggest dexterity, and its brain suggests potential. Some paleontologists have speculated that had dinosaurs not been swept away by the asteroid impact, Troodon might have continued evolving toward greater intelligence. In another timeline, perhaps their descendants would have built tools, formed societies, even written stories across the ages. But dinosaurs are only one chapter in the long book of prehistory. Before them, the oceans teemed with trilobites, creatures with segmented bodies and complex eyes, crawling across seabeds for more than 250 million years. That is far longer than humans have existed, and yet they left no cities, no machines, no visible trace of higher thought. Or perhaps they did, but the traces were too fragile, erased by time and tide. The very length of their reign invites the question: if longevity gives evolution the chance to experiment, could intelligence have been one of those experiments? In the seas of later ages, giant reptiles like ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs swam through the depths with sleek bodies built for hunting. Some of them had brains proportionally large enough to raise questions about their awareness. Marine life is harder still to trace in terms of potential civilizations, because the ocean is even less likely than land to preserve ruins. A culture of thinking ocean dwellers would leave behind little for us to find. Their tools perhaps crafted from materials that dissolved or decayed without fossilizing. If dolphins today can show glimmers of culture, why not their distant ancestors swimming in oceans that no longer exist? On land, long before mammals took their present forms, synapsids roamed creatures sometimes called mammal-like reptiles. They carried within them the seeds of traits that would later blossom into mammals, including larger brains, differentiated teeth, and more complex social behavior. For tens of millions of years, they were the dominant land animals, and some reached levels of adaptability that hint at more complex lives than we often give them credit for. If evolution had tilted just slightly differently, perhaps their descendants would have filled the role we now occupy. Even in the more recent past, among mammals themselves, there are whispers of possibility. Large-brained species such as whales and dolphins evolved long before humans. They still swim among us, carrying intelligence that we struggle to measure, communication systems we only partly understand, and lifespans that rival our own. Their aquatic world leaves few lasting traces. If a whale civilization had risen and fallen in deep time, building with organic matter or ephemeral structures of sound and cooperation, we might never know. The record of the sea is one of silence, not because nothing happens, but because so little endures. The more we think about candidates for ancient intelligence, the more we must loosen our grip on what civilization means. We often define it in terms of stone, metal, fire, and writing. But those are human expressions of intelligence. They are not the only possible ones. Another species might have found different paths, ones that left little for us to discover millions of years later. Perhaps a culture that wove intelligence into song, or into migration patterns, or into ephemeral creations made from materials that decay too quickly to fossilize. Intelligence is not a single mold. It is a spectrum, an open field where many kinds of minds might bloom. This way of seeing the past invites both awe and humility. Awe, because it reminds us that Earth has always been full of possibility, always experimenting with new forms of life, some of which may have carried sparks of thought we cannot measure. Humility, because it shows us that we are not as inevitable as we sometimes think. Our presence here may be just one outcome among many, one attempt among countless others. Perhaps intelligence is not a rare jewel, but a recurring feature of life, appearing again and again whenever conditions allow. As you let this thought settle, notice how it changes your sense of time. The past no longer feels like an empty stage waiting for us. It feels alive, full of hidden chapters, each one with its own cast of creatures, its own potential stories, its own rise and fall. Maybe we are the first to wonder at the stars, or maybe we are only the latest. Either way, our moment is part of something vast, a flow of experiments stretching back billions of years and continuing long after us. And so the prehistoric Earth, far from being silent or simple, becomes a canvas of endless imagination. Dinosaurs, marine reptiles, trilobites, synapsids, all of them remind us that intelligence could have taken many paths, and that some of those paths may have stretched further than we will ever know. What remains for us now is not certainty but wonder. Wonder at the possibilities hidden in deep time. Wonder at the idea that other minds may have walked, swum, or flown across this planet before us. Wonder at the fragile but beautiful role we now play in the ongoing experiment of life. 6. Ocean civilizations. Close your eyes and let yourself drift into the sound of the sea. Waves rising and falling, foam breaking gently against the shore, currents moving beneath the surface in slow and hidden rivers. The ocean has always carried with it a sense of mystery, a reminder that most of this planet's story is written not on land but in the water that covers more than 2/3 of its surface. Even today, with satellites orbiting high above, we know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the deepest trenches of our own oceans. And when we think about the question of ancient intelligence, of civilizations that may have come before us, it is tempting to keep our eyes on land, on fossils and stones and ruins. But what if the real story lies beneath the waves? What if the ocean itself once held civilizations, whole societies that rose, flourished and faded long before the first humans learned to walk upright? To imagine this, it helps to begin with what we see now. Dolphins, whales and certain other marine mammals show us that intelligence thrives in the sea. Dolphins use tools, carrying sponges on their noses to protect themselves while foraging. Orcas teach one another hunting techniques, passing them down like cultural traditions. Humpback whales coordinate complex songs that travel across oceans, their calls stretching for hundreds of miles, carrying information that we are only beginning to decode. These creatures live in societies, form bonds, teach their young, and remember across generations. If such intelligence exists today, then perhaps it has existed before. Perhaps the ocean has always been a cradle for minds as well as bodies. But what would an ocean civilization look like? Ours is built from stone, wood, and metal, shaped by fire and by tools made to carve and construct. Underwater, those materials and methods make little sense. Fire is impossible in a sea-drenched world. Wood decays quickly. Stone might be shaped, but currents and pressure would always threaten to erode it. A civilization born in the ocean might take a different path altogether, one rooted in sound, movement, and ephemeral construction. Instead of buildings, perhaps they shaped coral reefs, cultivating living structures as homes. Instead of writing on stone, perhaps they encoded knowledge in patterns of song, stories woven into melodies that could be passed down for millennia. Instead of monuments, perhaps they left trails of migration, pathways marked not with roads but with currents and tides, known intimately to each generation. The challenge for us, standing on land millions of years later, is that such traces would vanish almost completely. Coral reefs dissolve, bones scatter, and the ocean floor is constantly recycled by tectonic movement. None of the oldest seabeds on Earth are older than about 200 million years, a fraction of Earth's history. Anything built or shaped in those waters before that time is gone forever, swallowed and reborn as new crust. Even more recent traces would be hidden under layers of sediment, inaccessible, erased by the very medium that sustained them. If civilizations once lived in the oceans, they would have left behind almost nothing that we could find. Yet absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially in a world that forgets as quickly as the sea. Consider the possibility of a society that never needed fire or tools as we know them. Intelligence may not always strive for technology in the way we expect. It may focus on culture, on communication, on memory. A dolphin-like species might build its civilization in sound, creating complex languages and histories sung across the water. Their technology, if we can even call it that, might be biological breeding coral to form structures, training fish to migrate in useful patterns, shaping their environment in subtle organic ways. To us, looking back from a distance of millions of years, such a civilization would be invisible, as though it never existed at all. But in its time, it may have been as rich and as meaningful as ours. And then there are the cephalopods, the octopuses, squids and cuttlefish. Today, they live relatively short lives, most only a few years, but within those years they display remarkable intelligence. They learn, they solve puzzles, they escape from enclosures, they even seem capable of play. Their ancestors, the ammonites and nautiloids, filled the seas for hundreds of millions of years, some of them massive and complex. Imagine if, in one of those long spans of time, a cephalopod lineage developed not only intelligence, but continuity, passing knowledge down across generations, building on discoveries, evolving culture. What would such a society have looked like? Perhaps it would have been fluid and flexible, each generation inventing anew, shaping tools from shells, stones, or even from their own bodies. Perhaps they would have communicated in patterns of colour and light, flashing ideas across their skins in a visual language that would have looked like a living aurora. In the dark of the deep sea, that light would have been their library, their memory, their art. If such civilizations existed, what became of them? The answer may be the same that awaits us. Extinction. Mass extinctions have swept the oceans again and again, wiping out as much as 90% of marine life at times. A society that rose in one age may have been completely erased in the next, its people vanishing along with the trilobites, or the great marine reptiles, leaving no survivors to carry their story forward. In the silence that followed, new species rose to take their place, starting fresh, never knowing what had come before. To think of this is to feel both wonder and melancholy. Wonder, because it opens the possibility that the ocean has been home to more than just animals, but to cultures, perhaps even civilizations, now utterly gone. Melancholy because it reminds us that even intelligence does not guarantee survival. To be clever is not to be eternal. The sea may have held many stories, each one written, told, and then washed away, leaving the waters ready for the next. And yet, even if none of this is true, even if no ocean civilization ever flourished, the thought itself shifts how we see the present. Dolphins leaping at the bow of a ship, whales singing beneath the surface, octopuses changing colour as they slip through coral. They are no longer just animals. They are glimpses into what intelligence can look like in a different form, in a different element. They are living reminders that we are not the only ones who think, who remember, who feel. And if intelligence is possible here and now, then perhaps it has always been possible, again and again, throughout Earth's history. So the ocean becomes not just a mystery of geography, but of time. Beneath the waves lies not only the unknown of what we haven't yet discovered, but the unknowable of what may have once existed and is now forever gone. The sea is both a cradle and a grave, a keeper of secrets too well hidden for us to ever fully retrieve. When you stand at the shore and listen to the waves, perhaps what you hear is not only the present ocean, but the echo of all the civilizations that might have sung and dreamed in those waters before us. 7. Underground possibilities. Beneath our feet lies a world that most of us never think about, a world that stretches downward into rock and soil, into caves, tunnels, caverns, and chambers that twist away into darkness. We tend to think of the surface as the stage of life, the place where civilizations grow and history unfolds, while the underground is something separate, a place of burial, of storage, of roots and bones. But what if that assumption is too narrow? What if at some point in the vast span of Earth's history, intelligence chose not the open sky or the restless sea, but the safety and stability of the underground? Could an entire civilization have thrived beneath the surface, hidden away, leaving little for us to find millions of years later? It sounds like something out of folklore or myth, stories of hidden kingdoms beneath mountains, of Shambhala or Agartha, of secret passageways leading to worlds unseen. But myths often grow from seeds of truth, and in this case, the seed is simple. The underground offers advantages that the surface does not. Temperatures remain more stable below ground. The stone offers protection from storms, predators, and even cosmic events. In the depths, one can hide from the shifting chaos of the surface world. For an intelligent species trying to endure, to build something lasting, the idea of going underground may not be strange at all, it may be obvious. Even humans have always been drawn downward. Our ancestors used caves not just for shelter but for ritual. Deep inside caverns where no sunlight could reach, they painted animals and symbols, their hands outlined on the walls in red and ochre. These were not the acts of people simply hiding from the rain. They were acts of meaning, of culture. Caves felt significant, as though the underground itself carried a kind of sacredness. In other times and places, people built entire towns beneath the surface. In Cappadocia, in Turkey, underground cities housed thousands, complete with chambers for food, wells for water, even air shafts to breathe. In the deserts of Iran, aqueducts ran for miles below the ground, carrying water where the sun's heat could not reach it. Time and again, humanity has turned to the underground for survival. If we have done it in our brief blink of history, why couldn't another species, far older, have done the same on a grander scale? Imagine waking each day not to the sun, but to firelight flickering on stone walls. Imagine a society where children grew up without ever seeing a horizon, where time was measured not by dawn and dusk, but by the rhythm of lamps being lit and extinguished. Such a people would have thought differently about space, about sound, about community. In vast caverns, voices echo, carrying in ways the surface world does not. Music, ritual, and storytelling would fill the air, reverberating across walls until the underground itself seemed alive. Their myths might have spoken not of sky gods above, but of dangerous forces waiting beyond the stone, discouraging anyone from leaving. For them, the underground would not have been a refuge, it would have been home. Practical questions arise, of course. How would such a civilization feed itself? Where would it find water, energy, light? But nature already provides hints. Underground rivers carve through stone, aquifers collect water deep below the surface, fungi grow without sunlight by feeding on decay, and certain insects and fish live their entire lives in darkness, adapting to the absence of day. If a species learned to cultivate fungi, to hunt or breed cave-dwelling animals, to manage fire carefully, they could build an economy of survival. Over long spans of time, they might have developed their own methods of agriculture and storage suited for the depths. Perhaps they cultivated glowing fungi or bioluminescent creatures to light their paths. Perhaps they bred animals adapted to darkness, their society becoming a symbiosis of species unseen by the surface. The more we imagine it, the less impossible it feels. And yet, if such a civilization had ever existed, where are the traces now? The answer may lie in the very nature of the underground. Structures built beneath the surface are more easily hidden. If tunnels collapse, if chambers flood, if stone crumbles, the ruins may vanish into the earth itself, indistinguishable from natural formations. Unlike surface cities, which can be revealed by erosion or the shifting of soil, underground ruins might remain sealed forever, locked away where no one will find them. And even if uncovered, they might be difficult to recognize collapsed stone that once was architecture, minerals infilling where walls once stood. To a geologist millions of years later, they may look no different from the natural fractures and caves of the earth. Legends across cultures hint at hidden realms beneath us. They may be nothing more than stories, born of humanity's fascination with caves. But perhaps they echo something deeper, a collective memory of how natural it is to imagine life below the ground. The Greeks spoke of the underworld, not as a place of fire but as a vast subterranean kingdom. Native traditions often describe hidden peoples living beneath the mountains, emerging only rarely. These stories may not describe literal civilizations, but they reveal how deeply the underground has always haunted human thought. Modern science, too, adds a layer of possibility. Deep within the crust, microbes survive at pressures and temperatures once thought impossible. Some live not on sunlight but on chemical energy, drawing life from the minerals of stone. Whole ecosystems thrive in the dark, independent of the sunday. If microbes can endure there for billions of years, what might an intelligent species have done with such a refuge? Could they have carved entire worlds for themselves, far below our feet, their stories lost not to time but to depth? This idea does not need to be true to be meaningful. Even as a speculation, it shifts our perspective. We tend to see the surface as everything, as the whole story. But perhaps the Earth has always had two stages. One above, lit by the sun, where species rise and fall in plain sight, and another below, hidden, quiet, where life has written chapters we may never read. If intelligence has risen more than once, perhaps some of its experiments took place where we cannot easily look. And if that is the case, then the silence of the fossil record may not be silence at all. It may simply be that we have been searching in the wrong places. The underground holds secrets even now, chambers yet unexplored, passages that reach further than our technology can safely travel. To imagine that a civilization once flourished there is to accept that we may never know the full scope of Earth's history. It is to live with the humility that our vision is limited, our evidence incomplete, our certainty always provisional. But in that humility there is wonder too. Because if intelligence has thrived in places we cannot see, then the story of life on Earth is even richer than we dared to dream. So, as you lie back and let this thought settle, remember that beneath you, at this very moment, is not just soil and stone. There are layers of hidden space, silent and dark, that stretch downward into mystery. Perhaps they are empty, perhaps they are only geological, but perhaps, long ago, they held voices, footsteps, and stories of minds we will never know. The Earth is vast, not only across its surface but within its depths, and in that depth the imagination finds endless room to wander. 8. The role of mass extinctions. The Earth has never been a gentle stage. Its history is punctuated by cataclysms so immense that they reshaped not only the landscape but the very direction of life itself. When we think about extinction, we often picture it as a tragedy, the sudden disappearance of familiar creatures, the silencing of an era. And it is that, but it is also something else. A kind of reset, a turning of the page in the book of life. Mass extinctions clear the stage so that new players may appear, and in this rhythm of destruction and renewal, the possibility arises that intelligence, too, has been part of the pattern. Perhaps civilizations have been erased not just by the slow erosion of time, but by these violent resets that struck the planet again and again. The most famous of these extinctions is the one that ended the age of the dinosaurs. 66 million years ago, an asteroid struck the Yucatan Peninsula, releasing energy equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs. The sky darkened, temperatures plummeted, forests burned, oceans acidified, and nearly 3/4 of all species vanished. It is a story we tell often because it opened the way for mammals, and eventually for us. But what if it also erased possibilities we cannot see? Dinosaurs ruled for over 160 million years, ample time for intelligence to evolve in some branch. If it had, that branch was cut short in a single day, erased so thoroughly that only bones remain to remind us they ever lived. And this was not the only reset. The Earth has endured at least 5 great mass extinctions. The worst of them all came long before the dinosaurs, about 252 million years ago, in what is called the Permian extinction. It is sometimes called the Great Dying, because over 90% of marine species and 70% of land species were wiped out. The cause was likely massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia, which released so much carbon dioxide that the climate swung violently, oceans became toxic, and ecosystems collapsed. Imagine the breadth of life before that event, creatures we will never see, possibilities forever lost. If any line of intelligence had begun to take root, it would have been extinguished there, buried under ash and silence. There were others too. The Ordovician extinction, the Devonian extinction, the Triassic extinction. Each one reshaped the trajectory of life, not gradually, but suddenly, as though the planet itself turned a page with no warning. To live on Earth is to live on a world that forgets, but also one that resets. And in those resets, intelligence may have been both lost and prepared for. Perhaps each extinction did not only clear the way for new life, but also set the stage for the eventual flowering of thought. We may not be the first, but we may be the survivors of many such attempts, inheriting a stage that has been cleared and set anew countless times. When you sit with this thought, it becomes clear how fragile intelligence really is. We often imagine it as inevitable, as though the universe was always leading toward us. But the history of mass extinctions suggests otherwise. Life is resilient, yes, but it is also precarious. Whole lineages vanish in an instant. Evolution is not a steady climb upward, but a meandering path, full of false starts and dead ends, interrupted by sudden collapses. If we had lived in the age of the trilobites or the ammonites, we might have thought they would last forever. Yet they too vanished in the sweep of extinction. Our own moment feels solid, but it is just as vulnerable. And perhaps this is why it is difficult to see traces of earlier intelligence, if such traces ever existed. Mass extinctions do not merely end species, they erase landscapes. Forests burn, oceans shift, continents rearrange, climates swing to extremes. A civilization, even one that had endured for thousands or millions of years, could be swept away almost completely. Its bones would be scattered, its tools destroyed, its monuments ground into sediment. After millions of years, what would remain? Perhaps nothing recognizable. Perhaps only faint chemical traces, buried in rock, waiting for us to stumble upon them with no clue to their true origin. There is another way to think about these resets, not only as destruction but as opportunities. Each extinction opens a door. The death of one age allows the birth of another. The end of the dinosaurs allowed mammals to flourish. The collapse of ancient forests allowed flowering plants to spread. Each tragedy also creates possibility. If intelligence is part of life's pattern, then mass extinctions may not just end civilizations, they may make way for new ones. Perhaps this is why we are here now, at all. Perhaps other minds rose before us, erased by catastrophe, leaving us as the latest inheritors of Earth's resilience. From this perspective, mass extinctions are not only geological events, they are narrative beats in the story of life. They shape what comes next, and they remind us of how provisional everything is. They remind us that we too live on borrowed time. A meteor, a volcanic eruption, a sudden shift in climate, any of these could end our moment as abruptly as they ended those before us. To think of this is not to despair, but to feel a kind of humility. We are not permanent. We are participants in a story much larger than ourselves, a story that continues even when the chapters are torn out and rewritten. Perhaps the strangest thought of all is that mass extinctions might have happened so completely that they erased even the memory of civilizations. If another intelligent species once thrived here, its story may have ended in fire or flood, leaving us with no way to know it existed. In a sense, they would be ghosts not only of biology but of thought, their presence felt only as an absence, a silence in the record too deep to fill. And perhaps one day, we too will join them, our own civilization erased by the next great reset, leaving behind nothing but a faint line in stone, a whisper that another age of intelligence once flickered here. The Earth has always moved between abundance and collapse, creation and destruction. It is not cruel in this rhythm. It is simply vast and indifferent, older and more patient than any species it carries. We may be here now because of these cycles, but we should not mistake our survival for permanence. Just as life before us was erased, so too may we be, clearing the way for something else. And if intelligence rises again, it will not know us. It will write its own stories, imagine its own beginnings, never realizing how many came before. As you let this thought rest, notice how it reshapes the idea of extinction. Instead of an end, it becomes part of the rhythm. Instead of silence, it becomes transition. Our moment is real and precious, but it is also temporary. We may not be the first, and we will not be the last. The Earth has seen countless resets, and in each one the story of life begins anew. To live with this awareness is to live with both humility and wonder, knowing that our place is small but meaningful, part of a rhythm that stretches back billions of years and will continue long after we are gone. 9. The fossil record's silence. If you walk into a museum of natural history and stand before the towering skeleton of a dinosaur, it is easy to feel that fossils are everywhere, that the deep past has been laid bare for us in stone. Bones, shells, imprints of leaves and feathers, they seem abundant, as though the Earth itself has preserved every detail of its long history for us to study. But this is an illusion, born of human curation and careful discovery. The truth is far quieter and more unsettling. The fossil record is not a complete library. It is not even a partial library. It is a scattering of torn pages from countless books, most of which have been lost forever. It is a silence that outweighs the words, a silence so immense that it humbles even the most confident of conclusions. For a living thing to become a fossil requires a chain of events so precise and rare that most organisms never experience it. A body must be buried quickly, before scavengers and decay erase it. It must lie in the right kind of sediment, where minerals seep in and replace the fragile tissues with stone. It must avoid being destroyed by pressure, heat, or erosion before it can be uncovered again millions of years later. Out of the billions upon billions of creatures that have lived and died, only a fraction of a fraction ever become fossils. And of those, only some are ever discovered, exposed by erosion, revealed by quarrying, or unearthed by human hands. The rest remain locked away, or ground down into nothing, long before anyone can find them. This is why the fossil record feels so deceptive. We imagine that what we see in museums represents the fullness of Earth's story, but in truth it is only a sliver. Whole ecosystems may have risen and fallen without leaving behind a single preserved bone. Entire species may have lived for millions of years and yet be absent from the record, their traces erased by chance. The silence between fossils is far larger than the fossils themselves. When you think of this, the possibility of missing intelligence begins to feel less far-fetched. We assume that if an intelligent species had existed before us, we would have found clear evidence by now. But what if their remains never fossilized? What if their tools were made from wood, bone, or other perishable materials that vanished long before stone could remember them? What if their homes were washed away, their traces scattered, their bones lost to scavengers and decay? The fossil record is not a guarantee of discovery. It is a lottery, and most participants lose. Even in the case of humans, the record is fragile. Modern humans have existed for about 300,000 years, yet the fossils of our own species are rare. We know of them only because of extraordinary luck, the right burial conditions, the right discoveries. If the same logic applies to an earlier intelligent species, then their absence in stone is not necessarily proof of their absence in life. It may only mean that time and chance have hidden them too well for us to see. And beyond fossils, consider the artifacts of culture, tools, art, buildings. These are even more fragile than bones. A spear made of wood might survive for a few thousand years under perfect conditions, but over millions of years it would be gone. A stone tool might last longer, but distinguishing it from naturally broken rock is not always easy. Buildings made of wood, clay, or even simple stone would erode away within tens of thousands of years, erased by wind, water, and shifting earth. If our own cities were abandoned, they would vanish into ruin within centuries, and within 1,000,000 years, even their outlines would be difficult to trace. After 10 million years, little would remain that could be recognized at all. If an earlier civilization built in organic or fragile materials, their works could have vanished completely, leaving no hint of their existence. The silence of the fossil record is often interpreted as absence, but it may simply be a reminder of how little survives. In that silence, countless stories are missing, creatures that never fossilized, ecosystems that left no trace, behaviors that cannot be preserved in stone migration, communication, intelligence. A fossil can show us bones but not songs. It can show us teeth but not laughter. It can show us shells but not stories. The things that matter most to a civilization, their thoughts, their culture, their sense of meaning, are the very things least likely to be preserved. If another intelligent species once lived here, their most important traces would have vanished first. There is a humbling paradox here. We long to know the full story of Earth, yet the very nature of the planet denies us that possibility. The fossil record gives us glimpses, but never the whole. We see flashes of creatures that once were, but never the full tapestry. The gaps are immense, and what we fill them with is imagination. That imagination can take many forms: scientific hypotheses, myths of lost worlds, quiet speculation about what intelligence might have looked like long before us. In a way, the silence invites us to dream, to wonder about the possibilities hidden in time's erasures. Perhaps this is why the idea of lost civilizations lingers in human thought. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, countless myths of peoples who lived before us and were erased by catastrophe. These may not be literal memories, but they are reflections of the truth that much of Earth's history is missing. We feel that silence, even if we cannot explain it. We sense that the story is incomplete, that there are chapters we will never read. Myths are one way of filling that absence, of giving shape to the silence. But whether through myth or science, the lesson is the same. The fossil record cannot tell us everything. It is a broken archive, more gaps than pages. To live with this knowledge is to live with humility, to accept that certainty is impossible, and to allow curiosity to soften into wonder rather than answers. And so, the silence of the fossil record does not close the door on ancient intelligence. If anything, it leaves the door open. It reminds us that absence is not proof, that what we know is always partial, always provisional. It reminds us that we too will one day be part of that silence, our bones scattered, our cities dissolved, our stories forgotten. And yet, just as we wonder now about what came before, perhaps one day others will wonder about us. Perhaps they too will stand before the silence of the past and imagine possibilities that can never be proven but never fully dismissed. The silence is vast, but within it there is space to dream, and sometimes dreaming is the closest we can come to truth. 10. Lessons from human civilization. Take a walk through a city at dawn, when the streets are quiet and the air is cool. The buildings loom like cliffs of glass and stone, their reflections catching the first light of the day. It feels permanent, solid, immovable, an environment that will stand for centuries. Yet, if we slow down and look closely, we begin to notice how fragile even our greatest works really are. Cracks creep along the edges of concrete, rust nibbles at the beams of bridges, paint fades beneath the Sunday windows shatter with time and weather. The lesson is subtle but certain. Our civilizations are not as enduring as we like to believe. We are still young, a species barely 300,000 years old, and in that short span we have transformed the planet in ways no other creature has. We build skyscrapers and highways, satellites and spacecraft. We create systems of trade, networks of communication, and histories etched into books and digital code. It feels monumental. It feels lasting. Yet history shows us that even the grandest human achievements are impermanent. Cities rise and fall, empires bloom and crumble. What survives the longest is often not what we expect. A clay tablet may endure longer than a library of books. A stone carving may outlast a palace of wood, and over the scale of millions of years, even stone erodes into dust. We need only look at the ruins of ancient civilizations to see how quickly the earth reclaims what is built upon it. The pyramids of Egypt are some of the oldest standing monuments in the world, but even they are weathered, their outer casings stripped away, their stones eroded by wind and sand. The Colosseum in Rome, once a theatre of spectacle, now stands in fragments, its walls broken, its floors open to the sky. In the jungles of Central America, entire cities of the Maya were swallowed by vegetation, hidden for centuries until explorers stumbled upon them again. For all their grandeur, these structures are fragile against time, and they are only a few thousand years old. Now imagine stretching that scale. 1,000,000 years from now, what would remain of our world? Concrete would crumble, metals corrode, plastics break down into fragments too small to recognize. Even radioactive waste, one of the most durable legacies of our time, will eventually decay. Roads and bridges would vanish beneath soil, forests would reclaim farmland, cities would dissolve into indistinguishable hills. In 10 million years, there might be nothing left that a casual observer would recognize as ours. Perhaps only faint traces, chemical signatures in the soil, unusual isotopes in rock layers would remain to whisper that once, a species called humans walked the earth. This realization carries a lesson. If our own civilization, with all its might and technology, can vanish so quickly, how much harder would it be to find the traces of a civilization that existed not thousands but millions of years ago? We often assume that if others came before us, their presence would be obvious. But perhaps their traces are gone, buried or eroded, erased by the same forces that will one day erase us. Time is patient. It does not need malice to destroy. It only needs to move forward. And this brings us to a second lesson. Civilizations are not guaranteed survival. History is filled with collapses, sometimes slow, sometimes sudden. The Roman Empire fragmented under the weight of political turmoil and invasion. The Maya cities declined amid environmental stress and shifting trade. Ancient Mesopotamian powers rose and fell with the rivers and the land. None believed their world would end, yet all were proven wrong. Collapse is not an exception but a recurring pattern, and it can happen to any society, no matter how advanced it seems. For humanity today, the lesson is sobering. We stand at the height of our technological reach, and yet we remain vulnerable to the same forces as those before us. Environmental change, conflict, resource scarcity, and the unpredictable power of nature. To believe ourselves immune is to ignore the rhythm of history. If civilizations have risen before us, they too may have felt invincible, certain of their permanence, only to be swept away by time. And yet, there is also comfort in this pattern. If collapse is common, if impermanence is the rule, then our value does not lie in how long we last, but in how we live while we are here. Civilizations may crumble, but the meaning of their existence remains in the stories they told, the beauty they created, the moments of connection they nurtured. Perhaps the same would have been true of any species that came before us. Even if their traces are gone, their existence was not meaningless. It was part of the long experiment of life, part of the rhythm of creation and dissolution that has always defined this planet. Think again of the city at dawn. It feels solid, but it is fleeting. One day the buildings will fall, the streets will crack, and the land will return to forest or desert. But in this moment, people walk the streets, breathe the air, speak to one another, create and dream. That is what makes it alive, what makes it matter. The same is true of us as a species. Our permanence is not what gives us meaning. Our moment is. So what lessons can we take from the fragility of civilization? First, the humility that our time here is brief, and that we are not as eternal as we might imagine. Second, awareness that we should care for our world and for one another, because nothing we build will last forever, but the choices we make ripple outward in ways we cannot predict. And third, wonder that even in impermanence there is beauty, that civilizations rise and fall, but life itself continues, flowing forward, trying new forms, telling new stories. If humanity is not the first intelligent species to walk this planet, then the ruins of those before us have long since crumbled. Their cities are gone, their tools erased, their bones dissolved. But their existence, if it was real, still mattered. It mattered because for a time they too thought and dreamed. They too were part of the unfolding story of Earth. And one day, when our own traces are gone, we will be remembered in the same way, not through monuments, but through the quiet truth that we were here, and that our moment was part of the endless rhythm of life. 11. Echoes in myth. Across cultures and continents, separated by oceans and centuries, human beings have told stories of worlds that came before their own. Myths of great cities swallowed by the sea, of golden ages destroyed by fire, of peoples who lived beneath mountains or across vanished continents. These stories are often dismissed as inventions, metaphors, or exaggerations. Yet when we linger with them in a slower, gentler way, they begin to feel like something more. They feel like echoes, faint reverberations of ideas, memories, or intuitions about the fragility of civilizations and the possibility that others may have risen and fallen before us. Perhaps the most famous of these tales is Atlantis, described by Plato over 2,000 years ago. He spoke of a mighty island civilization, advanced and powerful, that grew corrupt and was punished by the gods, swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of disaster. Most scholars believe Plato invented the story as a moral parable, a warning against pride and excess. yet it has lingered in the human imagination, growing richer with each retelling, woven into novels, films, and dreams of lost knowledge. Why does it endure? Perhaps because it touches something we feel in our bones, that civilizations can vanish, that what seems permanent can be undone in an instant, that the sea itself may hide stories we cannot reach. But Atlantis is only one example among many. In India, ancient texts speak of Dwarka, a city said to have been built by Krishna, later swallowed by the ocean. In Japan, legends tell of Yonaguni, an underwater realm of steps and terraces, though scientists debate whether the formations found offshore are natural or artificial. The Maya and Aztec peoples told stories of previous worlds destroyed by floods or fire, with humanity recreated each time anew. The Norse spoke of Ragnarok, not only as an ending but as a cycle of destruction and rebirth. In Polynesia, there are tales of islands that sank beneath the waves, carried away by storms or the anger of the sea. In nearly every corner of the world, we find stories of loss, of worlds that ended, of peoples who vanished into the depths of memory. Are these merely metaphors, expressions of human anxiety about impermanence? Perhaps, but there is also the possibility that myths sometimes preserve fragments of truth, memories carried across generations in the only way early people could carry them through story. Flood myths, for example, are nearly universal, appearing from Mesopotamia to South America. Many may be rooted in real events: rising seas at the end of the last ice age, river floods that reshaped landscapes, tsunamis that swept away coastal villages. Over time, those events were transformed into stories of great deluges, passed down not as history but as myth, until the line between the two blurred. If ordinary floods could give rise to myths of world-ending waters, could other kinds of memories of vanished peoples, of ruins older than anyone could explain, have seeded stories of lost civilizations? Even when myths are not literal memories, they carry symbolic truths. They remind us that impermanence is universal, that nothing endures forever. They teach that civilizations can rise to greatness and still fall, undone by hubris, by nature, by fate. They tell us that we are not immune, that our own world could meet the same fate. In this way, myths serve as warnings. Atlantis is less about a place that once existed than it is about the fragility of all places, including ours. But there is also a more speculative way to sit with these stories. What if some myths are not only metaphors but faint reflections of realities long erased? Imagine ancient people stumbling upon ruins older than their own cultures, structures they could not explain. They would weave stories to account for them, attributing them to gods, giants, or vanished peoples. Over generations, those stories would grow, becoming myth. We already know this has happened in some cases. The Greeks, for example, told of the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants who forged weapons for the gods. Some scholars suggest this myth arose from fossilized skulls of prehistoric elephants found in the Mediterranean, their large nasal cavities mistaken for single eye sockets. The story was not accurate, but it was rooted in a real encounter with the deep past. How many other myths might have similar roots, born from ancient encounters with traces of a world older than memory? To listen to myths in this way is to treat them not as strict history but as whispers, hints of possibilities. They do not give us certainty, but they invite us to imagine. They suggest that the human mind has always sensed the depth of time, has always known that we walk upon layers of forgotten worlds. Even without science, even without fossils and geology, ancient people intuited that they were not the first, that others had come before. Myths are how they voiced that intuition, and perhaps this is why myths still resonate today. In a world filled with technology and data, we still feel the pull of Atlantis, of sunken cities and vanished ages. We dream of hidden histories because we know deep down that the Earth is older and more mysterious than we can comprehend. Science shows us the gaps in the fossil record, the erasures caused by time, the silences that outnumber the preserved. Myths fill those silences with story, giving shape to what we cannot see. The two approaches, science and myth, are not enemies but companions, each addressing the same truth in different languages. One speaks in data and probability, the other in symbol and narrative. Together, they remind us that our certainty is always fragile, our understanding always partial. So when you hear the story of Atlantis, or of a city swallowed by the sea, pause before dismissing it as mere fantasy. Let it sit with you. let it be both a metaphor and a possibility. Perhaps no great civilization was lost beneath the waves, but perhaps one was. Perhaps none of the myths are literal, but perhaps they hold fragments of truth so old we cannot separate them from imagination. Either way, they serve their purpose. They remind us that our own civilization, no matter how proud or vast, is not immune to impermanence. They remind us that we are part of a much larger story, one that includes both memory and forgetting, presence and absence, history and myth. The echoes in myth are not answers. They are questions given form, carried across centuries so that we might still hear them. And when we listen closely, we find ourselves wondering the same things as our ancestors. Are we the first? Or are we walking in the footsteps of those long forgotten, those whose names and stories are gone but whose possibilities still linger, whispering through time in the language of myth? 12. Nature's intelligence. When we talk about intelligence, we almost always imagine it as something individual, something that lives inside a brain, human brains, mostly, or the brains of animals we recognize as clever. But perhaps this view is too narrow. If we soften our gaze and listen to the wider world, intelligence begins to show itself in other places, in forms we often overlook. It may not always look like a mind behind a pair of eyes. Sometimes it looks like a forest, or a reef, or a swarm, or even the delicate balance of an ecosystem as a whole. And if intelligence can take these forms, then perhaps civilizations in the deep past may not have resembled us at all. They may not have carved stone or built monuments, but instead woven intelligence directly into the living fabric of the earth. Consider a forest. To us, it may seem like a collection of individual trees, each one standing alone. But beneath the soil, the trees are connected through a vast network of roots and fungi, a system often called the wood wide web. Through this network, trees share nutrients, warn one another of pests, and even support weaker or younger members of the community. A mother tree may funnel sugars and minerals into her saplings, helping them survive in the shadows. When danger comes, say, insects chewing on leaves, chemical signals can spread through the roots, prompting distant trees to produce defensive compounds. The forest is not just a set of individuals, but a community, communicating and responding as though it had a kind of collective awareness. Or think of coral reefs. Tiny creatures, each no larger than a fingernail, build vast limestone structures that rise like cities beneath the waves. Within these reefs, countless species of fish, crustaceans, and mollusks live in interdependence, each playing a role in the balance of the whole. When the reef is healthy, it is astonishingly complex, almost like a living machine. And though we do not usually call it intelligence, the reef demonstrates many of the qualities we associate with it: resilience, adaptation, communication, and an ability to maintain equilibrium. It is not a single brain, but a distributed intelligence spread across millions of organisms working together. Even insects, often dismissed as simple, show forms of intelligence that emerge not from individuals but from groups. Ant colonies build structures with ventilation systems that regulate temperature without any single ant understanding the full design. Bees coordinate through dances, communicating distances and directions of flowers with remarkable precision. Termites build mounds that maintain constant internal climates despite harsh external conditions. These are not random acts of instinct. They are complex adaptive behaviors arising from collective intelligence, from a kind of wisdom spread across the many rather than concentrated in the few. If we look at life this way, intelligence no longer appears as something rare or exceptional. It appears as something woven deeply into the fabric of existence. It manifests in many forms. In minds, yes, but also in systems, in networks, in relationships. It does not always leave traces we can measure easily, because it is not always built in stone or metal. It may live in balance, in rhythm, in the invisible threads that connect living things to one another and to their environment. Now imagine applying this idea to the deep past. What if millions of years ago, there existed civilizations not of individuals but of networks? Not of creatures building monuments, but of ecosystems shaping themselves with intention? To us, intelligence is something that speaks and writes, that constructs artifacts, but perhaps other intelligences shaped worlds in ways that left no artifacts at all, only changes in the patterns of life. Perhaps an ancient forest, now long gone, was not merely a collection of plants but a civilization, communicating across miles of underground networks, maintaining stability, adapting to threats, passing along information in chemical language we will never decipher. When that forest was buried by time, when its wood turned to coal, what remained was only fuel for our fires, not the memory of its awareness. It is difficult for us to imagine intelligence that does not look like ours, because we measure everything against ourselves. But the more we learn about the natural world, the more we are forced to expand our definitions. A slime mold, for example, has no brain, no nervous system at all. And yet it can solve mazes, finding the shortest path between food sources. It can remember where it has been, avoid obstacles, and adjust its behavior to changing conditions. Its intelligence is not in neurons, but in its body, in the way it moves and responds to the world. If a simple slime mold can do this, what might a whole ecosystem be capable of? Seen from this perspective, the line between civilization and nature begins to blur. Our own species often imagines itself separate from nature, carving cities out of forests, bending rivers to our will. But perhaps we are only the latest expression of intelligence that has always existed here, an intelligence that flows through roots and rivers, reefs and swarms, long before it ever took the form of writing or architecture. And if this is true, then perhaps Earth has always been home to intelligent civilizations, though not in the way we usually define them. Perhaps the great forests of the Carboniferous period, the sprawling reefs of ancient seas, the vast networks of fungi that once stretched beneath primeval soils, perhaps these were forms of civilization in their own right, now erased not by failure but by transformation. This way of thinking does not give us certainty, but it does open us to wonder. It suggests that intelligence is not a narrow summit but a wide plain, one that life explores again and again in countless ways. Some of those ways leave ruins we can recognize. Others leave nothing at all, except perhaps a change in the balance of ecosystems, a signature too subtle for us to notice millions of years later. We may never know if ancient forests or reefs carried forms of intelligence we cannot recognize, but the possibility itself changes the way we see the world. It reminds us that intelligence is not only ours, not only now, but perhaps always and everywhere, woven into the very story of life on Earth. And so, when we look for traces of civilizations that may have come before us, we might also look not just in stone and metal, but in the patterns of life itself. In the silence of the fossil record, in the missing chapters of history, there may be hidden stories of intelligences too different for us to recognize, too fragile to leave behind the kinds of monuments we expect. Perhaps they were never gone at all. Perhaps they are still here, in the roots of trees, in the songs of whales, in the shimmer of coral, waiting for us to listen in a different way. In this thought, there is humility, but also comfort, because it means that intelligence is not fragile, not a rare accident, but a persistent current in the river of life. It means that even if we are forgotten, even if our ruins crumble and our memory fades, the earth will not be empty. Intelligence will rise again, in forms both familiar and strange, in places we cannot yet imagine. And in that rhythm, we are not alone. We are part of a greater chorus, one that has been singing since life began. 13. Alien parallels. When we lift our eyes to the night sky and let them linger, we are met with a question so vast it almost slips through our fingers. If life can arise here, if intelligence can bloom on Earth, why not elsewhere? Stars are born, stars die, planets spin around them in countless orbits, and many of those planets must have oceans, atmospheres, and the right conditions for life. By numbers alone, it feels almost certain that Earth cannot be the only place where thought has awakened. And yet, when we listen, the sky is silent. No signals, no spacecraft, no clear evidence of civilizations beyond our own. This puzzle has a name, the Fermi paradox, and it haunts our imagination. But perhaps, if we look carefully, the same silence exists here on Earth. Perhaps our own planet carries a version of this paradox, one that suggests that civilizations may not always last, and that silence is not absence but simply what remains after the voices fade. The Fermi paradox begins with a simple observation. The galaxy is vast, billions of stars, many of them older than the Sun, many with planets in the habitable zone. If civilizations arise often, the reasoning goes, then some should be older than us by millions or billions of years. They would have had time to explore, to colonize, to leave traces. Yet when we look, we find nothing. No signals, no structures, no visitors. The stars are full, but the night is quiet. Where is everyone? On Earth, we face a similar question when we look into the deep past. If intelligence has the potential to arise, why should it have happened only once? Why should humanity be the only species to reach civilization in billions of years of Earth's history? Life has had countless opportunities, and intelligence has flickered in many branches: birds, dolphins, octopuses, elephants. If the conditions are right, why not earlier? Why not multiple times? The silence in the fossil record mirrors the silence in the stars. And perhaps the answer is the same. Civilizations may not last long enough to be found. This idea is often framed in terms of the Great Filter, a concept in astronomy and philosophy. It suggests that there is some step in the path from life to intelligence to civilization that is incredibly difficult. So difficult that most never make it through. Perhaps the filter is at the beginning, and life itself is rare. Or perhaps it is at the end, and civilizations tend to destroy themselves or fade away before they can reach the stars. On Earth, too, the Great Filter may have operated. Perhaps many species flirted with intelligence but were cut short by extinction, by catastrophe, by the fragile balance of survival. Perhaps we are here not because intelligence never arose before, but because we are the first to pass through the filter this far. But there is another possibility. Perhaps civilizations are not rare at all. Perhaps they rise again and again, both here on Earth and across the galaxy, but the traces they leave behind are fleeting. A species may thrive for a few thousand years, even a few million, but in the scale of cosmic time that is the blink of an eye. Ruins crumble, signals fade, planets recycle themselves, stars shift. What is left after civilizations vanish is silence, not because they never existed, but because time has erased their footprints. In this way, the silence of the galaxy and the silence of Earth may not mean we are alone. They may only mean we are latecomers, walking across a stage where many performances have already ended. When we place these parallels side by side, a humbling picture emerges. We may not be the exception, but part of a pattern. Intelligence may not be unique, but temporary. A flame that burns bright and then goes out, again and again, across planets and across ages. What we call silence may in fact be the background hum of countless civilizations, each one erased by time. We do not see them because we are listening too late. And one day, others may listen for us and find the same silence, wondering if they, too, are alone. This perspective shifts the way we see ourselves. Instead of imagining humanity as the only voice in the universe, we can imagine ourselves as one voice in a long chorus, most of which we cannot hear. Our moment of song may be brief, but it is part of something larger. It connects us not only to possible civilizations among the stars, but to possible civilizations in Earth's own forgotten past. Both remind us that intelligence is fragile, that permanence is an illusion, and that survival is never guaranteed. And yet, there is a kind of comfort in this view. If intelligence arises again and again, then we are not an accident but part of a rhythm. If civilizations vanish, then we are reminded to cherish the one we have, to care for it while it lasts. The silence of the stars, like the silence of the fossil record, is not a void but a reminder that our time here is precious, that we are temporary but meaningful, that even in silence there is connection. When you next look up at the night sky, consider this. The stars you see may have hosted civilizations long ago, their stories erased by time, their voices faded into quiet. And when you walk across the Earth, consider that the ground beneath your feet may once have held other stories too, other minds now erased. In both cases, what remains is mystery, and in that mystery, wonder. The parallels between Earth and the cosmos do not answer our questions, they only deepen them. But perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the value is not in certainty but in the act of wondering itself, in the recognition that we are part of something so vast it cannot be contained in knowledge alone. So the silence of the stars and the silence of Earth may be mirrors of one another. Both remind us that life is fragile, civilizations are fleeting, and memory is always incomplete. But both also remind us that the possibility of intelligence is everywhere, waiting to rise again. We may not be the first, we may not be the last, but for now, we are here, a voice in the quiet, part of a pattern that stretches across time and space, more mysterious and more beautiful than we will ever fully know. 14. Possible traces. When we wonder about civilizations that might have existed long before us, we often imagine ruined cities hidden beneath jungles, pyramids crumbling under the sea, stone roads stretching across deserts. But if such civilizations existed millions of years ago, it is unlikely we would find anything so direct. Time is a relentless eraser, and stone, metal, and bone all eventually yield to its patience. If traces remain, they would not look like monuments. They would be subtler, woven into the very geology of the Earth, waiting quietly in places we rarely think to look. One of the most likely forms of evidence would be chemical. Our own civilization has already begun altering the composition of the planet in ways that will endure far beyond our lifespans. Plastics, for example, are being buried in sediments across the world. Tiny fragments of them, microplastics, are falling with rain, drifting through oceans, and embedding themselves in soils. Millions of years from now, these plastics will not look as they do today, but their chemical fingerprints may persist, trapped in layers of rock. A geologist of the far future might find unusual carbon structures or polymers that do not form naturally, a strange signal of an industrial age long past. Fossil fuels too leave behind their mark. By burning coal, oil and gas, we are releasing ancient carbon back into the atmosphere, altering its balance. Already, scientists can measure these shifts in ice cores and sediments. A sharp spike of carbon isotopes tells a story of sudden change, a story that will be visible for millions of years. If another civilization burned fuel in ages past, their own spike might still linger somewhere in the geological record. Perhaps we have seen such anomalies already and simply interpreted them as natural events. Radioactive isotopes offer another clue. Nuclear reactions create elements that do not occur in significant amounts naturally, or that exist only for a limited time before decaying. Our own nuclear tests of the 20th century have spread such isotopes across the globe. Even if every reactor and weapon were dismantled tomorrow, these isotopes would remain detectable in sediments for tens of millions of years. They are, in a way, a permanent signature, a marker of technological activity. If another civilization reached a nuclear age before us, their own isotopic trace might still be buried in stone, faint, but discernible to anyone who knew how to look. Then there are patterns of climate. Our activities are reshaping the Earth's climate at an unprecedented rate. The warming we are causing will leave signals in the geological record. Changes in temperature, shifts in ocean acidity, the redistribution of species. Millions of years from now, these changes will be visible in coral reefs, in the chemistry of shells, in the layering of sediments. If an earlier civilization once reshaped its climate, their legacy might also be detectable not as buildings or artifacts, but as sudden disruptions in the natural cycles of the Earth. We might also consider mining. Humans have moved vast amounts of Earth, extracting minerals and metals from deep within the crust. These scars will eventually erode and vanish on the surface, but traces may linger underground, in the strange absence of minerals that should have been there. A future geologist could find unusual gaps in deposits, missing veins of ore that suggest deliberate extraction. If others mined before us, perhaps some of the absences we encounter today are not simply the product of natural processes, but the remnants of ancient industry. The difficulty lies in interpretation. Nature itself creates anomalies. Volcanoes spread ash and alter chemistry. Asteroids scatter rare elements across the crust. Shifts in ocean circulation can mimic sudden climate change. How do we tell the difference between a natural catastrophe and the hand of an intelligent species? This is the challenge that the Silurian hypothesis posed. Even if an industrial civilization existed millions of years ago, would we be able to recognize its traces, or would we dismiss them as geological accidents? The answer may depend less on evidence than on imagination. Our expectations shape what we see. We look for ruins because that is what we build. We look for metals and plastics because those are the materials we use. But an earlier civilization may have looked entirely different. They may have relied on organic technology that left no chemical trace, or on ephemeral structures designed to blend with nature. They may have been masters of energy forms we have not discovered, leaving behind signatures we do not yet know how to recognize. If their intelligence was unlike ours, then their traces would be invisible to us, not because they do not exist, but because we do not know how to see them. And yet, there is value in searching. Already, scientists study anomalies in the geological record, spikes of carbon, layers of metals, sudden extinctions. Most are attributed to natural causes, but a few remain puzzling. What if some of those puzzles are the fingerprints of forgotten civilizations? We may never prove it, but to ask the question expands our perspective. It reminds us that Earth is older and stranger than our certainty allows. If anything, these possible traces teach us as much about ourselves as about the past. They show us how fragile our own presence is, how quickly we will vanish into silence. They remind us that our true legacy may not be our monuments but our chemistry, not our cities but the thin lines in stone that mark how we altered the world. And they invite us to imagine that others before us may have done the same, leaving us with the task of listening not for voices, but for whispers buried deep in rock and time. So the next time you hold a stone in your hand, pause and look closer. Within it may lie not only the memory of volcanoes and seas, but also, just possibly, the faintest trace of minds that lived long before ours, minds that left no ruins but left their mark all the same. And whether or not we ever find such traces, the possibility alone reshapes how we see ourselves. We are not the pinnacle of history, but one layer among many, a trace in the making, soon to be buried in the long memory of the earth. 15. The test of time. Time is the most patient sculptor, and it works not with tools but with silence. Everything that exists is eventually shaped by it, worn down, buried, erased, or transformed into something unrecognizable. When we think about civilizations, whether ours or any that might have come before, the greatest test they face is not war, or famine, or even extinction. It is time itself. Time does not rush, but it never stops. It turns mountains into dust, rivers into plains, oceans into deserts. If we wonder whether other intelligent species walked this earth long before us, we must first accept how little survives the long passage of ages. The test of time is absolute, and almost nothing passes through it unchanged. Consider how quickly even our greatest works would vanish if left untended. Within decades of abandonment, nature would reclaim our cities. Vines would climb buildings, trees would push through roads, animals would return to places once filled with people. In a few centuries, steel would rust, glass would shatter, concrete would crack and fall. After 1,000 years, forests would cover suburbs, deserts would swallow highways, seas would drown coastlines. In 10,000 years, very little would remain visible. And yet, in the scale of Earth, 10,000 years is barely a heartbeat. Stretch the clock to 1,000,000 years, and all traces of our cities would be erased, ground into sediments, carried by rivers to the sea. Even our tallest skyscrapers would leave only the faintest imprint in layers of stone, indistinguishable from natural formations. This is the same silence we encounter when we look backward. We see fragments, bones, shells, impressions of leaves, but never the full story. The fossil record preserves so little, and even that little is often broken, scattered, incomplete. Civilizations, with their fragile materials and fleeting lifespans, have little chance of surviving this erasure. If others came before us, their traces may have been lost not because they were insignificant, but because time does not keep memories the way we wish it would. Even the hardest materials fail the test of time. Stone erodes, marble dissolves, metals corrode and oxidize. The Great Pyramids, which feel eternal to us, are only a few thousand years old, and already they are worn and weathered. Give them another 100,000 years, and the desert winds will wear them down to nubs. In 1,000,000 years, they may be indistinguishable from the surrounding rock. Extend that to 10,000,000 years, and there will be nothing left at all. If monuments that seem eternal vanish so easily, what hope would there be of finding the works of a civilization that lived not thousands but millions of years ago? Even bones, the most enduring relics of life, are fragile in the face of time. Fossilization is rare, requiring just the right conditions. Most living things are devoured, scattered, or decayed before they can fossilize. Of all the billions of humans who have lived, only a tiny handful of remains will ever fossilize, and fewer still will ever be found. The odds of finding the bones of an earlier intelligent species, buried millions of years ago, are vanishingly small. Their absence in the fossil record does not prove they never existed. It may simply mean that time has swallowed them. But if time erases so thoroughly, why do we continue to search? Perhaps because even the faintest traces matter. A layer of unusual isotopes, a sudden shift in carbon chemistry, a pattern in the rocks that cannot be explained by natural processes. These are the whispers that may survive the test of time. They are not monuments or artifacts, but signatures, fingerprints, left behind by the brief passage of intelligence. Our own age will leave such signals: plastics embedded in sediments, radioactive isotopes scattered across the globe, carbon spikes in the atmosphere. Long after our buildings are gone, those traces will remain. And if others once lived here, perhaps their traces are hidden in similar ways, subtle, waiting for us to recognize them. There is a kind of humility in this. Time does not play favorites. It does not preserve what we consider important. It buries kings and peasants alike, palaces and huts, species and civilizations. It reminds us that permanence is an illusion, and that our presence here is temporary. Yet there is also comfort, for though time erases, it also transforms. It turns bones into fossils, forests into coal, shells into limestone. It writes new stories with old materials. Even if our own civilization is erased, the atoms that formed us will remain part of the Earth's continuing story. When we imagine earlier civilizations, we should not picture them as eternal monuments hidden beneath the ground, waiting to be discovered whole. More likely, they were like us, fragile, fleeting, vulnerable to the passage of ages. Their cities may have lasted for centuries or even millennia, but in the face of millions of years, they would dissolve into silence. Their test was the same as ours: to live meaningfully in the time they had, knowing that time would eventually erase their works. If they existed, we may never know their names or their stories. But their presence may still linger, faintly, in the chemistry of stone, in the rhythms of the earth, in the subtle ways time remembers even as it forgets. The test of time is not one we can win. No species can. The earth itself will change beyond recognition, continents shifting, mountains rising and falling, seas advancing and retreating. What we can do is recognize our place within this vast rhythm. We can live with humility, aware that we are temporary, but also with wonder, aware that even in our impermanence, we are part of something larger than ourselves. So when you stand in a ruined city or hold a fossil in your hand, remember that you are looking at something that has passed the test of time, at least for now. And when you look at your own world, with its skyscrapers and highways, remember that these too will vanish. Time will take them, as it has taken everything before. But for now, they are here, and so are we. That is enough. To live, to dream, to wonder in this fleeting moment that is our part in the story, our way of meeting the test of time. 16. The continuity of life. If there is one truth that flows gently through all of Earth's history, it is that life continues. Not in the same form, not in the same place, not with the same characters upon the stage, but always with new variations, new expressions, new rhythms. Civilizations may rise and fall, species may appear and vanish, entire ecosystems may be erased by fire, flood, or ice, and yet life persists. It bends, adapts, transforms, and carries forward something of what came before. This continuity is the thread that connects us not only to the first humans, but to the first mammals, the first fish, the first single-celled organisms that stirred in ancient seas billions of years ago. And perhaps, if we allow ourselves to imagine, this same thread may connect us as well to civilizations long forgotten, to other forms of intelligence that may have come and gone before us. When we trace this continuity, we see that life is not a ladder, always climbing upward towards some inevitable goal. It is a river with many branches, splitting and rejoining, some streams ending, others flowing on. Intelligence, too, may be one of those branches. It may have emerged more than once, not as a destination, but as one of many experiments. Each attempt might have ended, swept away by extinction, or absorbed into the background hum of nature. And yet, the river of life flowed on, carrying the possibility forward until it surfaced again in us. If so, then we are not an exception, but part of a pattern, one more expression of the continuity of life. This continuity is visible in our own bodies. Look at your hands, your spine, your eyes. Each feature carries echoes of earlier forms. The bones of your hand mirror the fins of fish, the wings of bats, the claws of reptiles. Your spine is a legacy of ancient creatures that first learned to swim, later to walk, and later still to stand upright. Even your vision is shaped by pigments that first evolved in ocean-dwelling organisms 500 million years ago. You are not separate from the life that came before. You are a continuation of it, shaped by the same processes, carrying forward the same story. And this is true not only for our bodies, but for our minds. The way we think, the way we communicate, the way we form societies, these are not wholly new. They are built upon older patterns, echoes of what came before. The cooperative hunting of wolves, the complex songs of whales, the social bonds of primates. All of these are threads that weave into the fabric of human culture. Our intelligence may feel unique, but it is rooted in a continuity of awareness that has been experimenting for millions of years. If civilizations before us existed, then they too would have been part of this continuity. Their rise would not have been a break from life's story, but another verse in its ongoing song. Even if their traces are gone, their presence may still live on in subtle ways in the genetic memory of species that survived alongside them, in the ecosystems they shaped, in the geological signatures they left behind. Life does not discard its past entirely. It carries it forward, transforming it, weaving it into new forms. We are not just the heirs of our immediate ancestors. We are the heirs of everything that has ever lived. This perspective changes the way we think about beginnings and endings. A civilization may fall, but life continues. A species may vanish, but its legacy echoes in those that follow. The continuity of life ensures that nothing is entirely lost, even if names, stories, and artifacts fade away. What remains is the influence, the transformation, the way the presence of one age shapes the conditions for the next. If other intelligent species lived before us, then we carry something of them within us, not their monuments or their language, but their place in the long unfolding of life. To feel this continuity is to feel connected not only backward in time, but forward as well. Just as we inherit from what came before, others will inherit from us. Our species may not last forever, but life will continue, adapting to whatever changes come. Perhaps new species will rise, perhaps new forms of intelligence will emerge. If so, they will not be separate from us, but extensions of the same story, carrying forward something of what we were. In this sense, continuity offers both humility and comfort. Humility, because it reminds us that we are not the culmination of history, only a moment in it. Comfort, because it assures us that even when we are gone, life will go on. Continuity also invites us to see the present with gentler eyes. It reminds us that the forests, oceans, and skies around us are not just scenery, but living expressions of a story that has been unfolding for billions of years. When you hear the call of a bird, you are hearing not just one creature, but the echo of countless generations, each adapting, each carrying forward the thread of life. When you walk through a forest, you are moving through a living archive of resilience, a place where life has persisted through ice ages, extinctions, and upheavals. Everything alive today is a survivor, a carrier of continuity. Perhaps this is the most important lesson of all. We often ask whether we are alone, whether others have come before us, whether other civilizations may exist somewhere among the stars. But even if we never find proof, even if silence is all we hear, we are never truly alone. We are always in the company of life, always connected to what came before and what will come after. The continuity of life is the truest civilization, one that transcends individuals, species, and even worlds. And so, as we imagine forgotten civilizations and wonder about their place in Earth's story, we can take solace in this. They are not gone entirely. They are part of the same continuity that now flows through us. They are present in the same way that all past life is present in the soil, in the air, in the water, in the very cells of our bodies. We carry them with us, even if we cannot name them, even if we cannot prove they ever existed. The continuity of life holds everything, and in that continuity, nothing is ever truly lost. 17. The fragility of memory. Memory is a fragile thing, even for a single human life. We forget names, lose track of moments, let years slip by in a haze of details that fade as time moves forward. If memory can dissolve so easily within us, how much more fragile must it be for civilizations? Human culture itself is a vast memory, one carried not in neurons but in books, stories, art, and architecture. Yet it too is impermanent. Libraries burn, languages vanish, and traditions are lost when those who carry them are gone. If we wonder whether civilizations existed before ours, we must first confront the delicate, transient nature of memory. What we call history is not the full truth of the past, but only what has survived forgetting. Even within recorded human history, so much has already been erased. we know of entire civilizations only through fragments. The Indus Valley culture left behind great cities with streets and drains, but their writing system has never been deciphered. We know they spoke, dreamed, traded, and lived full lives, but their voices are silent. The Etruscans of Italy left inscriptions that remain only partly understood. The Maya carved histories into stone, many of which were destroyed by time and conquest. Countless others, peoples without written language, left behind almost nothing. Their songs, their rituals, their ways of seeing the world gone, except for faint echoes in the practices of those who came after. If memory is so fragile across a span of thousands of years, how much must vanish in millions? If even our own ancestors are shadowed in silence, then any trace of civilizations before humans would be far more elusive. Memory dissolves, not only through neglect but through the Earth's own processes: erosion, burial, tectonic shift. Stories once spoken are swallowed by soil, monuments crumble, bones dissolve. Memory is not only lost, it is overwritten, replaced by new layers of life and stone. This fragility makes us realize how rare the act of remembrance really is. To remember, something must survive the erosion of both time and circumstance. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest surviving stories, exists only because clay tablets endured where papyrus or parchment would have decayed. But how many epics, equally rich, are gone forever? How many entire traditions left no lasting trace? When we ask whether civilizations lived before us, we are asking whether any memory of them has survived the erosion of unimaginable spans of time. The silence we encounter may not mean there was nothing to remember. It may mean that memory itself could not withstand the ages. Even in our own age, memory feels precarious. We store knowledge on fragile media paper that yellows, film that cracks, magnetic tape that decays, digital files that vanish when servers fail. We tell ourselves that the internet is forever, but in truth it is deeply fragile. A century without electricity, and most of our digital record would be unreadable. Our books would rot. Our photographs would fade. If our civilization collapsed tomorrow, what would remain after 1,000 years? Perhaps some stone buildings, some scattered inscriptions. After 10,000 years? Perhaps only a handful of artifacts, stripped of context. After 1,000,000 years? Almost nothing. Our memory, like all before it, would dissolve into silence. And yet, even in this fragility, there is a kind of beauty. Memory is delicate, but while it lasts, it carries incredible weight. A single story can travel across centuries. A myth can preserve a sense of continuity even when details are lost. The Iliad, sung before it was written, survived for generations through human voices alone. Indigenous traditions around the world have carried knowledge of stars, animals, and landscapes for thousands of years without written words. Memory does not have to be permanent to be powerful. It only has to endure long enough to give meaning to those who hold it. Perhaps civilizations before us had their own ways of remembering. Perhaps they told stories in forms we cannot recognize, encoding memory in song, in ritual, in patterns of migration or construction. Perhaps their memory was biological, passed not through words but through genetics, teaching, or instinct. Perhaps, like coral reefs or forests, they carried their memory in the shape of the environment itself, so that each new generation grew within the legacy of the old. If so, then when they vanished, their memory vanished with them, leaving no trace for us to find. And yet, in their time, their memory would have been just as rich and meaningful as ours is now. The fragility of memory teaches us humility, but also urgency. We often think of permanence as the measure of significance, but perhaps it is the opposite. Perhaps what matters most are the fragile things, the fleeting stories, the delicate connections that exist only for a moment. Their impermanence makes them precious. If civilizations before us lived and were forgotten, their existence was not meaningless. It mattered in its own time, just as ours does now. Memory need not last forever to give life meaning. When we sit quietly with this thought, it changes how we see ourselves. We are part of a continuum not only of life but of memory. We inherit what has survived from those before us, and we pass on what we can. But we also know that much will be lost, that forgetting is inevitable. To live with this knowledge is to accept impermanence not as a failure, but as part of the rhythm of existence. Memory flickers and fades, but while it burns, it lights the path of meaning. And so, as we wonder about lost civilizations and their forgotten stories, we are reminded of our own fragility. One day, our memory too will be gone, erased by time. But until then, it is ours to hold, to shape, to share. And in that sharing, we connect not only with one another but with the vast, fragile memory of life itself. A memory that stretches back into silence and forward into mystery, always dissolving, always renewing. 18. The future mirror. When we try to imagine whether civilizations existed long before humanity, we often look backward into the depths of time, sifting through fossils and myths, searching for hints in silence. But there is another way to think about this question, by looking forward instead of back. If our own civilization were to end tomorrow, what would remain of us after 1,000 years, after 1,000,000, after 100 million? In imagining our own disappearance, we begin to see more clearly the fate of any civilization that might have come before. The future becomes a mirror for the past, showing us how little survives, how fragile presence truly is. Suppose our cities were abandoned today. Within a few decades, plants would reclaim the streets. Vines would climb buildings, roots would crack pavements, and animals would nest in what were once offices and homes. In a century, many structures would collapse, undone by weather and neglect. Forests would stretch across suburbs, rivers would reroute themselves, deserts would swallow highways. To a traveller stumbling upon them, the remains would already be difficult to recognize. The memory of our architecture would survive only in the faintest outlines, soon to be erased entirely. In 10,000 years, nearly all visible traces of us would be gone. Metals would corrode into dust, plastics would crumble into microscopic fragments, scattered invisibly through soil and sea. Our books would have rotted, our digital records long unreadable. Even our bones, unless fossilized in perfect conditions, would have dissolved into earth. A few stone structures might survive in partial form, the pyramids perhaps, or Mount Rushmore, but they too would wear down, becoming indistinguishable from natural rock formations. To anyone arriving then, the surface of the earth would appear untouched, its scars healed, its memory reset. 1,000,000 years would erase even more. The shifting of tectonic plates, the grinding of glaciers, the rising and falling of seas, all would work together to bury or obliterate what remained. Cities would become sediment, mountains would rise and erode, coastlines would redraw themselves. Our traces would be scattered so thinly across the layers of the earth that only the most careful geologist, in some far future, could detect them. Even then they would not find skyscrapers or bridges. They would find anomalies, spikes of carbon, unusual isotopes, traces of synthetic chemicals. To them, we would not be a people but a puzzle, a sudden disruption in the natural order. Stretch the clock further still 10 million years, 100 million, and even those traces would grow faint. Rocks would be subducted back into the mantle. Oceans would carve new shapes into continents. Entire mountain ranges would rise and fall. Whatever remains of us would be deeply buried, transformed into forms unrecognizable. Our presence would be reduced to the thinnest of lines in stone, a whisper that might be missed, a hint too subtle to interpret. If another species were to rise by then, they might never know we existed. They would walk the earth as we do now, wondering whether they were the first, unaware that others had come and gone before them. This exercise in imagination is sobering, but it is also clarifying. It shows us that the absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence. If we can see how easily our own civilization could vanish, then we must admit how easily others could have vanished too. The silence of the fossil record, the lack of obvious ruins, does not prove we are the first. It only proves that time is thorough, and that civilizations are fragile against its slow, patient erasure. The future mirror also reveals something about the nature of legacy. We often believe our monuments and achievements will endure forever, but in truth, our most lasting marks may be the ones we do not intend. The chemical traces we leave in the atmosphere, the plastics we bury in sediment, and the isotopes we scatter through nuclear activity, these will outlast our cathedrals and our computers. To future eyes, we may be defined not by our art or philosophy, but by our waste, our pollution, our impact on climate. What we most value may be forgotten, and what we most ignore may be remembered. This is not unique to us. It may have been true of any earlier civilization as well. Their greatest stories may be gone, while their unintended marks linger faintly in stone. And so, the future mirror offers both humility and perspective. It humbles us by showing how small our presence truly is in the face of deep time. But it also offers perspective by reminding us that we are part of a larger rhythm, one in which civilizations come and go, leaving behind traces that may or may not be found. We are not separate from this rhythm. We are inside it, subject to the same erasures and the same silences. There is also comfort in this view. Even if we are forgotten, we will not be meaningless. Our existence will have been part of Earth's story, a chapter in the continuity of life. We will have shaped the planet, altered its chemistry, left behind signals even if faint that testify that we were here, and if others once existed before us, they too were part of that story. Their traces may be gone, their names unknown, but their existence mattered in the same way ours does now. The future mirror reminds us that permanence is not the measure of significance. Meaning is not found in what survives forever, but in what is lived fully in its time. Civilizations may fade, but while they endure, they dream, create, and connect. That is enough. It is enough for us, and it would have been enough for any that came before. So when we look into the future and imagine our own disappearance, we are also looking into the past, seeing how easily others might have been erased. And in that reflection, we find both humility and wonder. Humility, because we see that we are not immune to time. Wonder, because the very possibility that others lived before us expands the story of life into something far greater than ourselves. The future and the past meet in silence, and in that silence, we are invited to dream. 19. A shared planet. When we look at the Earth as it is today, we see a planet alive with diversity. Forests stretch across continents, oceans teem with creatures both familiar and strange, and the air is filled with birdsong, insects, and the quiet rhythms of wind and rain. Humanity is here, yes, but we are not alone. We share this planet with countless other species, each one playing its part in the great web of life. And when we ask whether other civilizations may have existed long before us, it helps to remember this truth. Earth has always been a shared planet. If intelligence rose before, it did not rise in isolation. It would have lived alongside others, woven into the same tapestry of life that continues today. Think about our own species for a moment. We tend to imagine ourselves as unique, set apart from the rest of life, yet our story has always been entangled with others. Wolves became our companions, guiding and guarding us. Horses carried us across plains, reshaping our movements. Plants, wheat, rice, maize, became partners in survival, changing with us as we cultivated them. Even the bacteria in our bodies are part of this shared existence, helping us digest, protecting us, shaping our health. Civilization has never been only human. It has always been a co-creation, built in partnership with other species. If earlier civilizations existed, they too would have depended on others, forming alliances, partnerships, and balances within their ecosystems. Now imagine a world millions of years ago. Suppose an intelligent species arose, perhaps a reptile, a mammal-like ancestor, or even a cephalopod in the ocean. They, too, would have shared their planet. Their survival would have depended on the species around them, the plants they harvested, the animals they domesticated or hunted, the ecosystems they relied upon for stability. Their story would not have been separate from the rest of life, but deeply connected, just as ours is. And this raises a question. What happens when civilizations forget that they are part of a shared planet? Our own history offers hints. We clear forests without considering the animals that live there. We dam rivers without thinking of the fish that migrate along them. We release gases into the atmosphere, altering climates not only for ourselves but for all creatures. When we forget that our civilization is woven into the web of life, imbalance follows. Perhaps this has always been the case. If civilizations before us existed, perhaps they too faced this challenge, balancing their growth with the needs of their world. Perhaps their failure to do so contributed to their disappearance. There is another way to think about this, though. Instead of imagining earlier civilizations as destructive, perhaps they lived in deeper harmony with their planet than we have managed. Perhaps they found ways to exist within ecosystems without overwhelming them, leaving so few traces that we cannot find them now. A civilization like this might not have built monuments or altered landscapes on a grand scale. It might have woven itself seamlessly into the rhythms of nature, its legacy subtle and ephemeral. In that sense, its absence from the fossil record might not be evidence it never existed, but a sign of how gently it lived. This brings us to the question of scale. We often measure civilization by its size, cities, nations, empires, but perhaps intelligence need not always grow large to be meaningful. A small local civilization could have existed in harmony with its surroundings, leaving little behind for us to discover. Think of hunter-gatherer societies today, who live in deep knowledge of their environments, shaping them subtly without overwhelming them. Their presence is not marked by skyscrapers or machines, but by stories, traditions, and relationships with the land. If earlier civilizations lived in similar ways, then their traces may be gone, but their existence would have been no less significant. To imagine Earth as a shared planet also reshapes how we think of the present. We are not the rulers of this world, but one participant among many. The forests do not belong to us, nor the oceans, nor the skies. They belong to themselves, and we share them. The more we recognize this, the more we see that our survival is not separate from the survival of other species. If bees vanish, so do the crops they pollinate. If oceans collapse, so does the climate they regulate. We are not independent, we are interwoven. And perhaps this interconnection is the deepest truth of all civilizations, past and present. To endure, they must recognize their place in the web of life. To ignore it is to invite collapse. If others came before us, their stories may remind us, if only we could hear them, that harmony is not optional but essential. Even without proof of earlier civilizations, this way of thinking offers a kind of guidance. It invites us to imagine ourselves not as isolated, but as part of something larger. It humbles us, showing that even if we are unique in time, we are not unique in essence. Intelligence has always been part of life's experiment, and life has always been a shared endeavor. We are not alone in our story, because our story has never belonged to us alone. So when you walk outside and feel the air on your skin, when you hear birds calling or see trees swaying in the wind, remember, this planet is shared. It always has been, and it always will be. Civilizations may rise and fall, but the web of life continues, carrying forward the memory of all that has lived. If others came before us, they too lived within this web, sharing the earth just as we do now. And one day, when we are gone, the planet will continue to be shared, with new species, new forms, perhaps even new civilizations. The earth does not belong to any one intelligence, it belongs to all life. That is the quiet truth of our shared planet. 20. The endless question. There is a certain stillness that comes when we reach the end of a long path of thought. We have wandered through fossils and myths, through oceans and mountains, through silence and speculation. We have asked again and again what might have come before us, what traces might remain, what shadows of intelligence might linger in the deep time of Earth. And yet here, at the edge of it all, we find not an answer but a question that refuses to close. What if humanity is not the first intelligent species on this planet? It is a question that resists certainty, but one that has value precisely because it stays open, because it reminds us of our limits and invites us into wonder. The Earth is vast in age. 4.5 billion years have passed since it first formed, and for much of that time life has flourished in countless forms. Our own presence, measured in mere hundreds of thousands of years, is almost nothing in comparison. If you were to compress Earth's history into a single day, humanity would arrive in only the final seconds before midnight. To assume that intelligence appeared only in those last seconds is to forget how wide the canvas truly is. Life has been painting its story across this world for ages beyond imagination, and intelligence may be only one of the many colors it has used more than once. And yet, time erases almost everything. Cities crumble in centuries, monuments in millennia, ecosystems in millions of years. What survives into the geological record is rare, fragile, and incomplete. We know that civilizations like ours are unlikely to leave obvious traces after even a few million years. If others walked here before us, their memory may be gone, their presence reduced to faint anomalies in stone and soil too subtle for us to recognize. This is the silence we face, not the silence of absence, but the silence of forgetting. The endless question is not only about the past, it is also about ourselves. To wonder whether others came before is to wonder about our own place in the story of life. Are we a unique event, or one of many attempts by the Earth to awaken thought, Are we the culmination of a long journey, or simply one more experiment, destined to fade like all others? The question humbles us, reminding us that we may not be as exceptional as we believe. But it also dignifies us, placing us within a rhythm far larger than our own moment, a rhythm of life exploring intelligence again and again in different forms. We can also turn the question forward, into the future. One day humanity will vanish, whether by slow decline, sudden catastrophe, or simple transformation into something new. Our age will end. The Earth will continue without us, just as it continued without the dinosaurs, without the trilobites, without the forests of the Carboniferous. If intelligence has arisen before, it may rise again after us, in species we cannot imagine, in forms beyond our comprehension. And when they look back, they may find the same silence we find now. They may wonder the same thing: were we the first, or only the latest? The question will remain, carried forward into the ages, unanswered and unanswerable. This is the gift of the endless question. It teaches us to live with mystery, to accept that not everything can be known. We live in a culture that often craves certainty, that seeks definitive answers, clear histories, and complete maps. But the story of the Earth is too vast for such closure. It holds silences we cannot fill, absences we cannot explain, depths we cannot measure. The endless question asks us not to conquer that mystery, but to rest within it, to let it soften us, to let it guide us into humility. And perhaps, in that humility, we learn what truly matters. If permanence is impossible, if memory is fragile, if certainty is beyond us, then meaning is found not in what lasts forever, but in what exists now. Our civilizations, our stories, our art, our connections, all of these are precious, not because they will endure, but because they are alive in this fleeting moment. To wonder about what came before is to recognize that we too will one day be forgotten. And yet, while we are here, we have the chance to dream, to create, to wonder, to love. That is enough. The endless question does not diminish us. It expands us. It opens us to a vision of Earth not as a stage built for us alone, but as a vast, ancient experiment in which intelligence may appear and vanish many times. It reminds us that we are part of something greater, something older and deeper than we can ever fully know. And in that recognition, we find peace. So let the question remain unanswered. Let it linger like a star in the night sky, distant and unreachable but full of wonder. What if we are not the first? What if others came before? Perhaps we will never know, but perhaps we do not need to. The question itself is enough. It keeps us humble. It keeps us curious. It keeps us awake to the mystery of being alive on a planet that has carried life through so many ages, so many experiments, so many forgotten stories. And when we are gone, when our own traces have been erased, perhaps the question will remain for others to ask. It will pass from one age to another, an eternal echo through the silence of time. Not an answer, but a reminder that intelligence is fragile, that life is resilient, and that wonder endures. The endless question is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a meditation, a way of seeing. It teaches us that the Earth is larger than our certainty, deeper than our knowledge, older than our imagination. It invites us to rest in that vastness, to live fully in our moment, and to let the mystery be enough.